Samia Khan here with your Fox 10 News Now update. Happy Friday afternoon. Welcome back to our regular viewers, those of you who tuned in to the morning edition of Fox 10 News Now, and welcome those of you who are just joining us for the afternoon edition of News Now. We appreciate you as well. We have a very busy afternoon ahead. Lots of political candidates speaking all over the country. I know during the last show you just caught Hillary Clinton speaking. Well, I know Ben Carson is speaking currently, which you guys will be able to watch a little bit later on. And momentarily, Steve Krafft, yes, the other SK in the building, will be sitting right here to tell me about his really cool interview that he just did exclusively in that studio. In fact, we're going to play the whole video. And it's very cool. Maybe you guys have heard of this film, Black Mass. I know that Mike talked to you guys about it in the last hour. It's a very popular movie in terms of the hype around it. It is out this weekend, and we have a local connection to that film, which Steve Krafft is going to explain momentarily. So hold on a second, guys. I'm looking at Steve Krafft right now. In fact, you gotta watch him leisurely walk over. There he is, the one and only Mr. Krafft.
I have to work on pieces at 5 and 6 o'clock.
Oh, so you're very, very busy.
Well, yeah.
But you're
A little distracted,
always
sorry.
Very,
I'm doing a bunch of things
you're
at the same
always
time.
really good at juggling.
Well, we're working on it. All right.
So it's great to have you here. I was kind of hyping up your story a little bit by letting them know about the big movie out this weekend and how
Yeah,
there's
called
sort
Black
of a,
Mass.
right, and how there's sort of a local tie.
Mm-hmm.
Today,
Today we interviewed a guy named Jack Callahan. Here in Phoenix, he worked as sort of a spokesperson for years for the FBI. For that, though, he had a long and distinguished career working undercover, busting up Mafia on the East Coast.
which is insane to me. We were
It is.
chatting,
It is completely
like an hour
insane.
ago he was here, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
how were you not afraid for your life? Did you ask him that in the interview? Like, were you ever afraid you were going to get killed?
Well, yeah, we've done stories with him before about that, and he always will say, well, there were people covering me, and, he's just a natural at it.
Right.
He's super street smart, and he can read people real, real well. And he just knows how to do it. It's just like when you talk to him, it's like, talking to someone who's in a TV show. I mean, or it's almost like watching a movie.
Like a
talking to him.
character?
Yeah, it's like watching a film, only it's him.
Elaborate on that idea.
Well, it's like he's lived a real movie life.
I see what you're saying. Like, what he lived in real life, he would only see on the big screen. You
Exactly.
would think.
Right. Yeah, it's like you're inside a movie when you're talking to him. But he was very successful, busting up some really, really, really notorious gangs and
Bad guys.
bad guys and mafia people. And
Like this guy?
he didn't directly bust Whitey.
So he
His
didn't.
real name was James Bulger, but
But he investigated him.
he grew up with him.
That's
He grew up in the same community as the Bulger family. Whitey's older than Jack is, but Jack knew the Bulgers, knew Whitey. While with the FBI, he met Whitey and interviewed Whitey. He sat across the table from Whitey Bulger. Bulger was a notorious Boston-based bank robber and Irish mob boss and killer. He killed like 19 people. And he had a very controversial stint as an informant for the FBI that was totally bungled. And that turned out to be a fiasco. And ultimately, Bulger fled. And he lived on the run for 16 years. And he was finally arrested, I think, several years back in Santa Monica, California.
a great city.
Yeah, he was right on the beach. And now he's going to spend the rest of his life, obviously, in
Behind bars.
prison, right? And his girlfriend, who helped cover up his whereabouts, is serving 8 years for knowing where he was and not telling anybody about it. And the interesting thing about Bulger is that there were 6 kids in his family. And he has a brother named Billy Bulger, where Whitey went one way into a life of crime and murder, Billy Bulger became a distinguished attorney, politician, and university president. He went to Boston College Law School, and from there became a very successful lawyer, and ultimately became a politician and the head of the Massachusetts State Senate. Very powerful guy. And then finally, from there, he became the chancellor of the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, Massachusetts. He was the guy who was in charge of it. He eventually had to step down from that post when it came out that he had allegedly covered up knowledge of knowing where his brother was hiding. And as a university president and a scholar, you can't cover up the fact that your murderous brother is on the lam and where he is. And
right.
He admitted he talked to his brother on the phone, that kind of thing. So it was a very controversial time. And Whitey Bulger is a notorious crime figure. And his gang was called the Winter Hill Gang in Boston. So Jack grew up in South Boston with the Bulgers, and he had this connection with these people. You know, the old cliche is you're either, growing up in an area like Southie, you're a lawyer, or you're a priest, or you're in the mob. You go one direction or you go the other direction. And this happened in this one family that split like that.
Wow. So this whole story is now the basis for this film that's coming out tonight.
This movie is coming out, with Johnny Depp playing Whitey Bulger.
I want to see I want to look at that image.
Yeah, and according to Jack, Johnny Depp as Whitey Bulger is very, very, very similar to what Whitey looked like. Now, of course, the picture that you show on Wikipedia here is an old Whitey Bulger when he was arrested about 4 years ago.
How about this one?
It's pretty good.
Is that Johnny Depp? Oh, wow.
Yeah, pretty good. He was a
crazy.
famous gangster, and Jack Callahan of the Valley knew him and dealt with him. Whitey Bulger was not a big guy, but he was a mean guy who would kill you and think nothing of it. It's just, wouldn't bother him a bit.
How do people do stuff like that?
That's why Americans, people generally, are fascinated with crime bosses and gangsters.
Right, because they're so nonchalant about it. They're like, oh, well,
yeah,
it's no
it's just
big
what they
deal.
do.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so he was a very vicious criminal. He had served time in Alcatraz for bank robberies, and, he spent a life killing people.
I want to read a comment. The Jew 632, I'm going to censor it a little bit, but he screwed the Chicago Mafia on the property deal.
That I don't know about.
I don't know about this, but...
he was a very scary guy.
Does Chicago have a mafia scene?
Huge,
growing up there.
Huge mafia scene. There have been over 1,000 gangster killings in Chicago.
Oh my gosh.
And they hit 1,000 years ago. So it was very, very common to be watching a newscast and some guy would be discovered shot to death in a car trunk at O'Hare Airport. There were reporters in Chicago who just covered the mob. That was their specialty.
Really?
Yes.
Is it still that way?
I don't know. I think the mob is still there, obviously, but Sam Giancana was killed and Alan Dorfman was killed. Some of these guys are gone now, but and the mob has changed. I mean, there are different groups who've gotten into organized crime, not just the Italian mob. There's Russian mobsters. There are gangs, Latino gangs, African American gangs, all kinds of people.
But do you put gangs in the same category as the mafia or the I always envision them as completely different, although I guess they have similar characteristics.
Well, I mean, if it's a very
involving crime,
sort of incestuous and highly organized and tradition-bound group of people working together, loan sharking and drug dealing, I mean, they're overlapping for sure. Now the Italian mafia has fascination for people because of the rituals and the blood ties and the family ties and the struggles among families against each other, crime families.
It's really intense.
It's an old tradition. And in Boston, which has a substantial Irish American community, there's an Irish mob.
That would make sense.
As well as an Italian mob, just in the same way you've got Russian mobs probably in L.A.
I never look for them, but you're probably right.
Sure.
You're probably
Wherever there's a group of people living together, there's...
And they have to be mobs?
It's just how it is, yeah.
I don't know why people are into that. But Tess asking, was he living clean while in hiding, or was he still living a life of crime?
That's a great question. He was living a very, very low-key life. I learned about him today talking to Jack that he was not a smoker. He drank virtually nothing except wine. He was a physical fitness fanatic. He kept slim and trim and strong his entire life, and he was healthy and living quietly with this live-in girlfriend of his. He had a wife before that and a child who apparently died. But, just enjoying his life on the beach.
Wow, and then he got busted.
He got busted, and the way he got busted, because they couldn't find him and his family was covering up for him, apparently. But somebody was able to trace his girlfriend. She was very fastidious about doing her nails, and her appearance was perfect.
As many people in LA are into their appearance.
Somehow the FBI took out ads in magazines and other media read by hairstylists, nail salon people. Have you seen so-and-so? She's wanted for harboring a criminal. And someone recognized her.
That is such a unique
They went after the girl.
way to track him down.
Yep.
Salon magazines?
Yeah. Yeah. Think about it. You're reading that and you're looking at these new... Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like you're just putting it in...
Well, you see FBI and you see this woman's picture. Have you seen so-and-so? She's accused of harboring this terrible fugitive, this notorious criminal.
What year was this?
2011 he was arrested, so just 4 years ago. He was very swiftly tried and sentenced to essentially the rest of his life incarcerated. And it was some of the families of his victims testified very emotionally, called him out, called him all kinds of names. And he didn't seem to bat an eye. So obviously with this man, there was part of him that just didn't register with him that...
What he did was wrong?
No, I don't think so. I mean, he knew it was wrong, and from what I gathered from Jack, Whitey Bulger is a very well-read person, very articulate, very intelligent. He just, it didn't faze him the way it would faze anybody else.
Right.
And that's why he became a famous criminal. He decided early on that sitting in an office and being a wage slave wasn't for him, and that he was going to live that life of, live the high life and rob banks and adrenaline fueled and at times violent.
I want to read some more comments. Let me scroll up. I may go and see the movie Black Mass tomorrow, Chris Wolfling says. It was all over the news up here when he was finally captured, Tom K says. Lana wants to know, does he kill people in jail?
No, not to my knowledge.
Was all over Southern Hills in Utah. They punked him out of the deal. Wrong move. Well, not him, his boss. Let's see. He was living in a random apartment complex.
Mm-hmm.
Les Chalmaine thinks Johnny Depp looks too young for the role. The makeup makes him look like a cancer patient instead of just old.
Well, it'd be worth seeing. Jack said he wasn't in a big hurry to see the movie. He'd see it eventually.
Is this an old famous case?
And this is true. Joe Foley says he was number 2 on the wanted list, only behind Osama bin Laden. That is true.
Wow, that's an interesting fact.
That's how hardcore and notorious this man was.
So how many people did he
19.
19 people.
Right. Yeah, for him, it was just business. Yeah.
Well, why?
People who crossed him. People,
How do people just? I still just don't understand.
Haven't you ever watched The Godfather?
Kind of.
Okay.
But that's fiction.
Well, but there's real gang wars going all the time.
I've never encountered anyone in the mafia to know or to believe that it exists, if that makes sense at all.
Okay.
Because I don't feel like the news covers the mafia.
Well,
so I guess in my mind, the mafia only existed in TV
mafia
shows
money
and
movies. Comes from.
That's all.
Holding up people in small businesses and entire neighborhoods demanding tribute be paid to them.
Right.
Loan sharking, juice loans, strip clubs, drug dealing. Cigarettes, alcohol. Any vice that people have, they
take advantage of it. But why kill? Do you want to go to prison?
Well, you just figure no one's going to catch you. No one's going to rat you out. No one's going to know. That's why they were
But
hitmen.
people end up getting caught.
People are fascinated with hitmen.
That's another thing that I don't believe actually exists. Like I don't. It's not that I'm naive. It's that I see it on TV and I see it in movies, but I just don't really think it. Like
And
for
they have
example,
colorful names, like
right,
Jimmy the Weasel
I don't
Fradiani.
know, like I'll reference a show right here on Fox. I love Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Great show. And then there's an episode where one of the early episodes where they take on this guy who's eventually a hitman who is of some ethnic group. And again, I just think it's made for TV, but
Well-
it's not. You're telling me this is straight up real.
Yep.
What's funny, I think I just saw an ad for Black Mass on...
Oh, wow. This is going to be a big movie.
That's on one of the channels
movie.
up there.
Because Johnny Depp was in another kind of gangster movie, Donnie Brasco.
Lana Crusoe is asking what Boston gang was he a part of?
The Winter Hill Gang.
Ale saying what?
So they were in
There's
Somerville, Charlestown, South Boston.
Wow.
You ever been to Southie?
I don't think so.
I went there once for just to eat something at a place.
Oh, by the way, I know that it's completely off topic. I probably should have asked you this before I got you on here. But you just got back from Southern California in the debate.
Yes, we did. We just drove back.
I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
Let me finish with these questions.
Lana asked, did he do the killing? Yes, he did. He personally shot people.
Wow. Tess saying the Mafia isn't as high profile in the media now as it was in the 60s and 80s. It was always in the news when I was growing up. See,
I think that's true.
I think that's why I'm not familiar with it.
Right.
Because I never...
I think lots of different groups of people are in
Solid.
organized crime. Organized crime is a way to describe it.
Organized crime. Like gangs.
Right. Or just organizations. There's organized crime ties in the Mafia, for example, to the telemarketing business.
Wait,
Anywhere you
what?
can, telemarketers,
They're
boiler rooms.
part of...
Yeah. They launder money through some legit businesses and some sort of criminal enterprises like that. Any way you can make money illegally by cheating somebody or forcing someone to pay you so they don't get killed, these are all Mafia things.
And it happens in real life.
Yeah, and in eastern cities, New York, obviously, with the 5 crime families. Chicago had long, and Al Capone was there, Cleveland had a pretty strong mob. There were mob connections earlier in history with labor unions, infiltrated some labor unions. Boston had big Boston Mafia. It's an old traditional thing.
I guess so. Virgil Ray Floyd saying grew up with them and know them, raised in Chicago.
Yeah, if you grew up in Chicago, you are familiar with the Mafia, at least by...
Well, you grew up in Chicago.
Yeah, and I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, I grew up in Fresno. What Mafia's in Fresno?
Trust me.
There's some gangs. Like I grew up watching
lots
the
of gangs
news,
in
seeing
Fresno.
gangs.
Big time.
I was aware of gangs.
That's a rough
existing.
town.
Well, parts of it, yes.
Real rough.
But I'm saying, the news allowed me to know that there were gangs that existed in Fresno.
And you know who's I don't hold myself out as an organized crime expert, but you know who knows a ton about it? Dave Muncy.
Oh, but he's not here today, is he?
I don't know.
Actually,
he reads
might be in.
deeply about it. He's got lots of books. He's really up on
So
it.
interesting. That
Really
is
into
a
it.
fun Muncie fact that I would
Yep.
not
He'll be all over this story.
expect. That's so cool. Just make a shell legit business. There you go. Everything is covered up. Mafia can make millions of dollars.
Yep. And Vegas, we've left this out.
Oh.
How did Vegas start?
You mean the city of Vegas is just a mafia town?
Well, a lot of it, yeah, it was. The early days of the Strip, you had Meyer Lansky out there, and you had a lot of Mafia figures who were behind casinos. Not anymore. Now they've been driven out essentially by these giant mega corporations like Hilton and Harrah's and all these...
Trump.
The Wynn Group.
Trump.
Trump. Well, he's not in Vegas really, but all these monstrous casinos are all big corporations, and even the Mafia cannot compete with a big company, a big corporation, multinational corporations who, the Mafia can't hang with them at all.
Yeah, Joe Foley saying the Mafia built Vegas, right?
Sure they did. Yeah.
Why do
you got to
think
watch more
they
movies.
Well, I guess. The juice. Why do you think they bought Laundromat? Washing money, literally.
Yeah.
Wow. Jared saying Vegas is still a mafia town.
I don't know.
What
got
about
some people
here?
here
Let's
from-
talk a little about Phoenix.
Phoenix has a mafia connection in that a lot of mobsters used to come here, like a lot of other people, for the winter.
Just like the Canadians
Yeah.
and the mobsters.
Mobsters came here for years, and the stories, that some old establishments, Durant's, for example, was a hangout for a lot of people, and allegedly, some mafia types way back in the day, and everybody else too. But I mean, it's kind of a historic place. But there were some mob killings here.
Yeah. I don't know
There's
why
some
that's so loud.
Mob killings here in Phoenix historically, and it doesn't have the reputation as being a center in any way of the mafia, but wherever people can do bad things and it's a nice climate, they're going to go. So, yeah.
That's true. So that's the only connection.
We've had our share
Vacations.
of mafia people now. I don't think it's by any stretch the number one source of crime in the valley.
No, that would be more gangs, right?
Yeah, all kinds of different things. Yeah. Lots of drugs. This happens in every big city.
Right.
But Jack's out here now, but he spent many years on the East Coast. And when you talk to him, he's got a thick as chowder,
Yeah, he does.
authentic Boston way of talking.
And it's possible that we could get him in this seat right here.
That would
on
be
News
great.
Now. He and I were
'cause-
chatting
'cause
about it. So.
I cannot do justice to what he knows about this.
Well,
whole
then
business.
also it allows the viewers themselves to ask the questions.
Yeah.
This is I'm sure it's a great interview, 25 minutes long, and I'm excited to watch it and play it for the viewers. But
He's a cool guy.
now they'll be able to talk to him too, hopefully in the
Yeah.
upcoming week or so.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
And you guys can go see the movie this weekend. Then you might have more knowledge, and then you might bring
you're
some
talking.
educated questions. I'm just building the hype for next week. But before I play this interview, I know you got to go do
I
some
have to write a
work.
couple stories. Yeah.
Any thoughts, quickly, on your trip to Southern California for the debate? I know you checked in quite a bit.
It was a total blur to us. We were just moving the whole time. I thought Trump would try to be a little more presidential. I thought he would try to be a little more specific. To me, he didn't do that. He kind of stayed where he was.
A lot of people saying that Trump failed with this.
We're
debate.
going to
He
find
didn't
out.
do well.
We're going to find out in the next couple of weeks whether he sort of plateaus and keeps the hardcore supporters that he has and doesn't really add to it and doesn't look like a plausible president, or whether people look beyond whatever these reviewers and pundits say, and figure that they still like the guy. He commands attention like nobody else, but he's at the point, I think, where he needs to tell people some specifics, and he didn't do that in this debate, and he was also silent for a while, and he also gave Carly Fiorina such a big, fat, inviting target with his stupid comment about look at her face. I mean, that's just like teeing it up for her to hit it out of the park, which she did. And then he offered kind of a lame comeback. I think he was probably.
Yeah, so I don't know.
But that was a gimme. It was just a total gimme. It wasn't like a great piece of debating by her. But I thought that she was impressive, and now she needs to show people that she's got a heart, in addition to a very tart sort of mouth. Now we want to see the real person underneath that very stern, dour
Humanize
exterior.
her.
Yeah, to the extent that can be done. And I'm curious, who is she really? I don't know. She's obviously a very smart person, very formidable person.
Well-spoken.
Well-spoken. But, she ran for Senate in 2010 at the height of the Tea Party wave, where if you figured anybody had a pretty good chance to pull one out, it might be her. You had a Republican governor in California, and the whole country was against President Obama's moves. A lot of people were. And she lost that election by 10 points. Not even close.
That's not close at all.
And her record as CEO of Hewlett-Packard is decidedly mixed at best.
Which was brought up.
Yes, and not very much, but that will be something down the road that will be brought up a lot more. The company just took a beating. Now, whether she said during the debate that it was a mutiny by the board of directors and that she was put in this terrible situation, but the general consensus in Silicon Valley was that, she was a poor CEO and her reputation there is not good and she doesn't have much support there. And she spent years there at Lucent, AT&T, and HP, and yet she doesn't really get money out of those people. There's not much love for her there. So she's got lots of reasons explaining that.
Who's her biggest backer?
I don't know if she's got a billionaire in her corner. I don't think she's really needed that much money so far. But now I think she's a serious player in this race.
Right.
And on the positive side, she's, I think the best pure debater. I know Ted Cruz is supposed to be this great Oxford debater. He hasn't impressed me very much. She's good.
Speaking of Ted Cruz, he's actually on right now, in case you guys wanted to just show you that. There's his face. That's all I'm going to say. It's labeled Samia Khan and Steve Krafft, but I was just showing them.
Cool, yeah. Yeah. So, finally, I'll say that Jeb Bush tried hard to break through this time, really tried hard. I think that...
Did better?
Yeah, I think Kasich did. I think Rand Paul had a good debate, made some really interesting points, kind of counterpoints to Republicans' orthodoxy. Scott Walker was loud but not particularly interesting. Marco Rubio was real smooth but often overlooked. Mike Huckabee was kind of a preacher, which is kind of his style.
Right.
He's got his fans.
Lana wants to know what the atmosphere was like in this actual.
It was this airplane hangar there. It's it was not like the crowd in Cleveland, which was more of a cross section of Republicans, in a much bigger space. This was a small space, and only the elite Republican movers and shakers, to me, seemed to be part of it. It was like going to a country club.
That would make sense.
Everybody was well-heeled, everybody was well-dressed, and almost everybody was white. And I snuck in afterwards and got some appetizers at this fabulous,
Were they good?
fabulous reception they had for the party faithful, or chieftains, or
my
whoever
gosh.
these people were. They obviously were pretty elite because they had some great food. And all we had a chance to get was like shrimp cocktail and a couple other things.
Hey, at least you got something.
Yeah, we just got what we could because we didn't have time to eat.
Yeah, busy,
But this
busy
was
life of a reporter.
a high rolling affair. The Reagan Library is on top of a mountain or a hill, very steep hill. It's great. It's an incredible museum. But this was not an event that any regular person could go to at all. It was heavily secured. There were snipers on top of the building where the debate was held. I don't know why.
Maybe they were.
There's no president there.
Future president.
I don't know, but none of them are president right now. And why these guys were there?
Maybe someone angry about Trump though, because keep in mind that the Trump protesters outside too, and it's Los Angeles where there's
They were down the bottom of the
I'm just saying
mountain.
there's a large Latino community in Los Angeles
I
that
know.
could have been angry with Trump. Is all I'm saying.
I don't know. It seemed like a lot of overkill. There were helicopters flying overhead. It was crazy.
That sounds fun though.
It was cool. It was a great event. It was very well run. The people at the library were super nice, and they do a beautiful job. So it was cool to visit. And this is just a second debate. We still got months and months before the first caucus and primary. It's not until early February.
Wow.
So
Days away. All right. Well, I know you need to get to work. I know a lot of you guys are talking about where you would bury bodies in Phoenix if there was a mafia.
And I will say, Joe, you're right. Trump did look flustered at times.
All right. Well,
Okay.
Thanks for hanging. I'm going
got
to
it.
play this interview now with Jack Callahan. And you guys enjoy this video. And I'll see you guys momentarily.
What do folks not know about Whitey Bulger?
Well, I've only met him a couple times. I know him through growing up in the same neighborhood when I was a kid. Moved about 2 miles away to Dorchester, but most of my close friends were in South Boston, so I hung around there quite a bit. My dad was the headmaster at the South Boston High School and the football, basketball, baseball coach up there.
What was Whitey's reputation growing up?
Well, he's about 25 years older than I am.
But what was his rep around the neighborhood?
That's what I was going to say. His rep was that he was a tough guy, not a big guy. He stands about maybe 5'10", probably weighs 170, weighs a little bit more than that now, pictures I've seen of him. Tough kid, good with his hands, but compared to some of the guys in the South, he was a lightweight. But, you put a gun in the hand of a guy like Bulger, all of a sudden he's the toughest guy in town.
So, from a young age, he was murderous?
Well, you know, he started out robbing banks, doing some hijacking, things along that line. I'm not sure if he was murderous early on. I'm not sure anybody tested him early on. I'm not sure he was ever in a position where he had to make that decision early on. But it certainly turned out he was murderous.
What was it about him that was so evil?
Well, first of all, he was very bright. He was a bright guy. He was a leader. He had no fear, none. And didn't like to work 9 to 5. Decided early on he was going to make his life in crime, make a lot of money, rob banks, end up robbing banks as he stepped up. Went to prison for that, came out of that, and then got hooked up with some bad guys who went to Hill Crowd out of Somerville, and went from there.
So guys like that, to kill someone, they don't bat an eye.
You know, you're right. That kind of, I never could get myself into that mode. You know, the guys that I work with and the ladies that I work with, some of us have been in different situations throughout our careers and had to use weapons, and sometimes deaths occurred. And for the most part, that stay with us for a long time. This guy didn't blink an eye. First time I really met him, I'd met him occasionally, hi, how are you, bump into him someplace in the store or something. But first meeting I ever had with him was in Conley's house in South Boston. And out of the blue, all of a sudden these guys they had to walk up a flight of stairs. Well, apparently the door was open or they had a key, I wasn't sure which. All of a sudden they just appeared from nowhere. And 3 of them walked in the room, Stevie Fleming, Whitey, and Kevin Weeks. And Bulger introduced himself. Jack, we've met before, but I'm Jim Bulger, and this is the Rifleman, which was the nickname for Stevie Fleming, supposedly earned with his service in Korea. And they never even introduced Weeks. Weeks just leaned against a buffet table in the dining room, and Conley and I and Jim Bulger and Fleming sat at the table.
And what happened? What was that like?
Well, I had tried to get the Reader's Digest version of this. There was a kidnapping. About a year before that, I had just come up after a 4.5 year undercover, deep cover in New England and up and down the East Coast. Political corruption, things like that. A lot of names on paper, 60 Minutes, whatnot. National TV covered it. And between trials, and I think there was 9 or 10 trials, at times it seemed like there was 900 trials, I'd take on different assignments because it was usually a month or two between the trials. And there was a kidnapping of a 13-year-old young girl in Wayland, Mass, Sarah Pryor. And they asked me to go out there and help with that investigation. And we did the search, and we had the Night Stalker up, which was the plane at that time with the special infrared. And a lot of tips were coming in. We're chasing our tails, really, trying to find out. Nobody had any idea. Nobody had a clue. I don't know if anybody's ever been arrested for it. But a month or two down the line, the guy who was working that case with me came over and said, on the tip line, the name came in as from some young punk from South Boston. And what do you think we should do about it? And I said, well, I don't know the name. Have you checked with Johnny Conley? He said, no, Johnny doesn't know it either, but he wants to talk to you. So next thing I know, Johnny's at my desk, and I've known John for 50 years. You know, we went to school together, we played ball together. His younger brother and I were best friends and lifeguards. His mom and dad were real good to me when I was a kid. And he said, what do you think? Think we should talk to Whitey? And I said, sounds like a good idea. What do you think? He says, yeah, I think I can set it up. If he doesn't know this guy, he certainly can find out about him. And so I went down the hall and talked to the special agent in charge. At that time, there was a lot of consternation in that office about Conley's activities with Bulger. It was pretty well known that Bulger was a source for John. And there were all sorts of, the office was almost divided, opinion-wise, on whether or not that it was a good thing, for many, many reasons, and I could talk for days about that. But I went in to see the big boss, and I said, look, here's the situation that I just described to you, and I said, there's some thought that I should talk to Bulger, and Connie can set it up, and he'll be there. What do you think? He said, what do you think? I said, I think it's a good idea, but I'm not going unless you approve it. So he approved it, and that's how I ended up in Connie's house that evening with Bulger and crew.
Now there you are sitting across from Whitey.
Yep.
He knew you were an FBI guy.
He did.
What was his demeanor? What did he have to tell you?
I laughed because the first thing he said to me before we got all sat down was, can you get rid of that cigarette? He was a non-smoker and didn't like anybody who had, tobacco, cigars. So I said, no problem, I'll get rid of it. We sat down, he reached across the table, shook my hand, says, Jim Bulger, I know you know that, but I just want to, he was very polite. And as I said, he introduced Flemmy to me, who I had never met before, but I'd seen him when I was working with the special ops teams. Flemmy came up in a few of our investigations, a few of our surveillances. Introduced Flemmy and never mentioned Weeks, although Weeks was over here leaning against the buffet. And so I went through the scenario of the kidnapping of the fact that the course of the investigation, the tip had come in. It was strictly a tip at that point, but any information he could provide, I'd appreciate it. Maybe we could get this young lady back. And he said, okay, yeah, we'll get some information to you. We'll find out with this guy. Anybody around here? This is Stevie, and he said to Weeks, you know him, and neither one of them know him. Weeks, I think, said, I've heard of the guy, he's a lowlife. So, following day, Weeks showed up at the holding facility where this guy was being held on another charge. Nothing to do with the kidnapping or a sex crime. And put the fear of God in the guy, if you will. And kid broke down. I was there, but this is what came back to me. And, on my mother's honor, honest to God, I had nothing to do with it. And the information came back to me.
So, did he produce the guilty party or not?
No.
So, why are people so fascinated with Whitey Bulger?
Well, it's almost a dichotomy. He's a smart guy, a leader, all those qualities, who just threw it all away. His next youngest brother, Billy, brilliant guy, good guy, non-athlete, but a Greek scholar, a Latin scholar, triple eagle, that you and I have talked, BC High, BC Law. By then, I think he was the president of the Massachusetts Senate. Later on, he became the chancellor of the University of Massachusetts. A lot of people thought that, if Whitey put his nose to the grindstone, but he never gave that a shot.
So there are two brothers in this family. One of them stayed on the straight and narrow. The other guy went way off track, killed over a dozen people, made all kinds of money, was on the run for years and years.
16 years, I think, 15, 16 years on the run.
And the good brother covered up for the bad brother.
Well, you know, I don't think anybody ever proved that.
He had to give up his chancellorship at the University of Massachusetts.
Well, a lot of that was the publicity with the media back there who wanted to hang Billy Bulger because of Whitey. Just have this publicity and this focus on Billy Bulger through the media was with the purported information that Billy was getting Whitey out of all sorts of jams and things like that, which I don't think are true.
Well, let me ask you this. How was it that Whitey Bulger got caught? 16 years on the lam.
Well, he got caught. Somebody had a brilliant idea, and I'm not sure, I think it was an agent back in Boston who said, I think we're focusing too much on Bulger. He's a chameleon. You know, we know he can change his looks anytime he wants. How about we start focusing on the lady that he's traveling with, Catherine Grigg. And what they did, they put a program together. They knew that she was very fastidious about her hair and nails and things like that. She had a background in those fields. And they put ads in numerous magazines that catered to these shops, and had some billboards up, you know, this lady and a lady who lived either across the street or in the same apartment building as they did recognized Catherine and called in, and they sent somebody to Iceland to meet with her. She was a part-time resident for years in California, and half the year in Iceland, half the year in outside of LA. And she identified not only Catherine, but she identified Whitey, or Jimmy.
Wow, and
That's
this was
how it
in
went down.
Santa Monica he got
Yeah,
arrested?
Santa Monica.
When did he get arrested? It's been a few years.
I think it was 2011.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
So now he's in prison probably, what, the rest of his life?
Well, I think he's 85 or 86 years old. Yeah, I would say he's in for the rest of his life.
Do you think he's a remorseful guy? Does he strike you that way?
No. No, I don't.
You kill all those people, how could you not?
He's just, that's just his nature. I mean, he looks at it almost like it was a job. This is how they made, my actions contributed to me and made me millions of dollars. You know, took care of my people, Stevie and Kevin, and go on and on and on, Monorano, etc. And I don't think he's remorseful about anything except maybe that Catherine got 8 years as an accessory for not turning him in.
Are you looking forward to seeing this movie?
I'm not sure. You know, in some ways I am. In other ways, I really don't need to see it. It's almost like I lived it with these guys for years. I will see it. I'm not sure when I'll be ready to see it, but you know, I know practically everybody in there who's in. Not these are actors, obviously, but the stories they tell, and of course, it's a movie, not a documentary, so I'm sure at least 50% of it is garbage. Never happened, but that's not what sells tickets. So they'll make some. And I heard some guys have seen it already were quite upset. And I said, hey, you know, remember when Johnny Depp played Joe Pistone in Donnie Brasco? They had, you know, Pistone or Brasco chopping up bodies in a house. You know, never happened. So
Yeah.
it's, you know,
The Departed is another one movie like
Yeah.
that in Boston.
Yeah.
Did you see that one?
I did. Yeah.
Now, what is it about Southie that fascinates people so much, South Boston?
The characters that are there, you know, some great people, and some, I think half the guys who played ball for my dad, I should say. There's quite a few guys over the years that have played either football, basketball, baseball for my dad that were on the wrong side of the track. I mean, it was like, even when I moved to Dorchester, we had guys like that too. I mean, somebody made a left turn, somebody made a right turn. You know, Connie and I got lucky. We went to BC. Bulger had no interest in formal education, although he's a very educated guy.
Yeah.
You know, quite a reader. It just, I don't know. It's just.
So it's where good and evil live side by side.
Oh yeah, yeah. Sometime in the same house. Sometime in the same bunk bed.
I'm
So-
sorry. Hold on. I'm going to move my camera too.
Okay. That's the thing about it that's so fascinating, that it's a very tradition-bound neighborhood. A lot of families have been there a long time,
Oh yeah, not anymore.
and now it's changing. Yeah, but I mean, at least when I was back there, it was an Irish enclave.
Well, it was Irish, Italian, Lithuanian, heavy, Polish neighborhood. You know, practically 99% white.
Working class
Loyal,
people.
or working class people, you know, walking into Boston or walking to work in the day. Their number one concern with their kids, their loyalty was to their neighborhood. I shouldn't say. First loyalty would have been to their church, and next is to their neighborhood and to their neighbors. And somewhere down here is the Boston Police Department and the FBI and anything along those lines.
So it could be a pretty tough place if you were an outsider.
Yeah, it was a story I'll tell you that one year, every year they had the St. Patrick's Day parade. And my father's team won the state championship in basketball that year. Ray Flynn was his big ball player, who was
He was a mayor, right?
the mayor of Boston and subsequently became the United States ambassador to the Vatican. And so they were selected to lead the parade. So, of course, myself and my brothers, every year we'd go sit up in the high school, the parade comes right by. Great time, you know, if you're from Salty, you know. But a bunch of guys that I played ball with at BC, about 9 or 10 of them decided they were going to go to the game. And these were big, tough, some of these guys played pro ball, and 10 of them go into a bar waiting for the parade. Everybody's been, you know, having a few since 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning. I mean, these aren't amateurs, these are pros. And somehow words got exchanged, and these 10 or 11 guys got their butt kicked in this bar owner. And I go to school the next day, back to BC the next day, and go practice, and these guys are all coming to me, what the heck's going on? They're all stitches here and stitches there and noses over here. Yeah, just wasn't a place to be if you weren't, you weren't accepted there or if you didn't know somebody there. You know.
Jack, you're out of my spot.
I'm sorry.
You got to come back.
Have I moved up on you?
That's
I've moved way up.
So how many kids were there in the Bulger family? Most families are pretty
At
good
least
size.
6, 3 boys, Whitey, Jim, Billy, and Jackie, and at least 3 girls. I think Jean was the oldest, and I've forgotten the names of the other ladies.
So big family,
Big family.
Irish Catholic family.
Irish Catholic family. Father was came down from the background of the family. The Bulgers moved out of Ireland, potato famine into Newfoundland, spent many years up there, and then came down from Newfoundland to Dorchester, and then to Salty. Father was, good guy, but not a superstar. Mother ran the family and influence on the family, and lived in a project, brick project, maybe 3-4 stories, 5 stories high. Families, walls, thin walls. Everybody run with kids. Everybody had 6-7 kids running around like crazy guys, and it was a circus. It was a circus, and these projects were immense. They were huge. So it was something that you wanted to get out of if you were a young man or a young lady, and even a mother and a father, but they just couldn't afford it. It was low-income housing, really.
So they were stuck there.
They were stuck there.
Now, your family, your dad sounds like he was one of the leaders in the community. He was a headmaster of the school?
Yeah. That'd be the way to describe him. Headmaster at school, all-star, no, I shouldn't say it, Hall of Fame basketball coach.
Wow. And what school was this?
South Boston High School.
Wow. A public school?
Yeah.
Jeez.
That's was famous for the busing.
I remember that.
That was school.
That was a tough place to integrate.
I tell you, I used to tell people last time I saw my mother, she was on TV throwing a shoe at the school bus. Not true, but I mean.
Yeah. I remember that whole situation. That was very dramatic. I think, wasn't Kevin White the mayor back then?
Yes, he was. That's exactly right.
And Brooke probably was one of your senators? Maybe
I believe he was, Edward Brooke. He just died recently, I think.
Yeah, he did, a year or so ago. Interesting. Do you have any questions? And is there anything I haven't asked you, by the way, about the Bulgers? And you really went through that whole experience.
You got to go back on your mark, too.
I will.
Yeah. All right.
Just walking and
If
thinking.
you have any questions, let me know. But
Anything about why Conley?
probably all that stuff in a minute and 10 seconds on TV, I'm not going to get into that. But I am going to get into who Whitey was, that there was one good Bulger and one bad Bulger, that Whitey didn't have a conscience.
There were three boys, remember that?
Yeah, right.
Billy.
But the two that we really are focusing on. I don't know what Billy wound up doing.
You think he's retired?
He didn't get bad. He didn't go bad either.
Bill Bulger or Jackie?
Jackie, I mean.
Jackie's a good friend of mine. He's a nice guy. Not the sharpest tool in the shed. Got a lot of
I'll leave that part out. I'll leave
got
that
a lot
part
of
out.
freedom because of who his brothers were.
Yeah.
Hard worker, always had a job. He got himself into a jam. He was called before the grand jury. And they had found out, well, they had pretty good evidence that Whitey had a condo in Florida. And they also, not only did they find the condo, they found banks in the area that had funds in it, in Jackie's name.
Oops.
Okay? So Jackie gets called before the grand jury and says, I don't know what you're talking about. Here, this, what about this, what about this, what about this? The real story, if they ask you a question, they probably know the answer,
Yeah. Yeah.
So he got himself into a jam there, spent a couple of years in jail.
Lying to the grand jury?
Again, the loyalty to the
Yeah. So he knew where his brother was hiding out.
Billy's full power, if he had one, was he went before the Congress, which was kind of a setup. Congressman by the name of Delahunt from just south of Boston had no love lost for Conley and Bulger and stuff like that. And they dragged Billy down to testify about what outside business he ever had with Whitey and et cetera, what kind of help he gave him over the years. And he handled it. And they said, we have information that you've been in touch with him telephonically. And he said, I think he said, I did talk to him on the phone. And he's doing well. Everybody kind of giggled in the audience there. And the next question was, did you tell the FBI that? He said, no. Did you tell him where the phone call came from? No. Why not? Because he's my brother. I refuse to help anyone capture my brother. Even the bad stories and all this and his character, he's still my brother.
So,
So that was the end of the interview. Very well done, Steve Krafft. Very informative interview. I hope you guys in the chat room enjoyed it. I wonder if you guys are commenting on it. It looks like you guys have taken the chat in a different direction. That's okay. I see Chris says he may go see Black Mass on Sunday. First show when it's less crowded. That's a good plan. Go early morning Sunday. Probably won't be as crowded as a Friday night or a Saturday night. So smart thinking, Chris. All right, guys. So that is a wrap on that interview. Today's a busy day in terms of different candidates speaking. So there's this big event in South Carolina where many candidates are speaking today. This is an event that Donald Trump actually dropped out of just this morning because he's been facing all of that backlash after the whole Obama is a Muslim comment yesterday at his town hall. So he has dropped out of this event. This is the Heritage Action Forum where many of the GOP contenders were speaking or will be speaking out in Greenville, South Carolina. I know the South Carolina governor, Nikki Haley, is there. In terms of those speaking, Jeb Bush speaking, Scott Walker, Ben Carson, Ted Cruz, all of them have spoken already, but I know Kenzie will probably play those clips for you in the evening show. In the meantime, we're going to be getting Marco Rubio live, Rand Paul live, yes, Carly Fiorina live, Bobby Jindal, Rick Santorum. So we're going to take you guys live there right now. Let's go ahead and show you what the stage looks like. People getting very excited. Looks like they just took a brief intermission, and they're scheduled to start in just about 5 minutes. So stay tuned, guys. More news now is ahead. All right, guys, just want to acknowledge some of the chat going on in the chat room. Tess asking, where is this event? Maybe Trump just needed rest, lots of travel and media, plus he knows he might didn't do well at the debate. Well, this is an event where each individual speaks separately, Tess. This event is in South Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina. Many candidates scheduled to speak. I will tell you the names in that order. Once the event kicked off, it kicked off with Jeb Bush, then Scott Walker, then was supposed to be Donald Trump, but he did back out. Then Dr. Ben Carson and Senator Ted Cruz. Following that, there's Rick Santorum, Marco Rubio, Rand Paul, Carly Fiorina, and Bobby Jindal. Some of the speakers, including Jeb Bush, Scott Walker, and Ben Carson, who already spoke, will be played for you guys later on in the show, or if not during the afternoon edition, then the evening edition of News Now. So in case you want to hear from them, stay tuned. FNN will be providing you those speeches as well. In the meantime, we want to bring you the live coverage of what's happening right now in South Carolina.
For America, Mike Needham.
Fun. Who's having a good time? So what do you think? Should we keep going? All right. Our next video comes from a former senator from Pennsylvania and answers the question, what would Rick Santorum's presidency do to bring opportunity for all and favoritism to none?
I grew up in western Pennsylvania in a steel town. I saw how that steel town and the businesses supporting it was shuttered during the 1970s because of poor leadership in business, labor, and yes, in government. Today, things should be better. With technology and lower oil prices, we should be booming, and American workers should be doing well, but they're not. And the reason they're not this time is primarily government. You see on the left, you have Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, and they want to increase the size of government, make it harder for businesses to do well here, and then flood our country with both legal and illegal.
Uh-oh, it looks like we have lost our feed coming out of South Carolina. I'm going to hold on this for a second, hoping that we are able to reconnect to this feed. Not exactly sure what is going on. Uh-oh. It looks like we have temporarily lost the feed, which kind of sucks because we had the whole feed the entire time the stage was up. And then the minute someone actually comes out and something actually happens, we lose the feed. So I don't know if it's technical difficulties or if there's certain parts of the event that we can't stream. But what I do know is that we don't have a stream right this second. So knowing that, let me go ahead and play for you a couple of clips. And if the stream comes back, we will go back to it. So on that note, since we're talking about the Republican Party, I will go ahead and play this clip right here. It's a GOP meeting presser. This happened yesterday after a meeting. The Republican politicians spoke out. It's only about 6 minutes or so. So I'm going to play this for you guys, and hopefully we get that feedback for you.
Are somehow acceptable. That's why it's so important that we take this stand. That's why it's so important that the House vote on this legislation. And that's why it's also so important that the Senate vote on this legislation and that we not continue to allow a small minority in the Senate to withhold even debate on important legislation. The House is also going to continue the investigation. It is important that we hold these organizations accountable and that we make sure that the laws are strong to protect babies in this country.
Mr. Speaker, good morning. The whip mentioned budget reconciliation. As we we know there's just a fraction of the money that goes to Planned Parenthood, which is appropriated. I mean, does that seem to be the path that you're willing to go, because you have people saying, let's defund Planned Parenthood, but let's not shut down the government, and that's the option, that's the route?
There are a lot of steps in this process. A couple of those steps are being taken today as we vote on Representative Black's bill and Representative Frank's bill. You're going to see other steps in the coming weeks, and certainly reconciliation is a distinct possibility as well.
But it seems like you get closer to your goal via reconciliation than through the appropriation process.
There are a lot of steps that may get us a lot closer to our goal.
Actually, a question to Mr. McCarthy, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
You put out a statement today, your unabashed support for Speaker Boehner. Can you talk about the problem within your conference right now that so many want to take Mr. Boehner down, and why you felt the need to issue that statement?
I just feel talk about that takes you away the most important parts we have. If we want to be successful making government smaller, if we want to be successful in the bills we have on the floor today, that's a distraction. If we want to be successful to deny Iran the capability of getting missiles and keep America safer, and focus on what we were brought here to do. We have an election every 2 years to pick our speaker. We've had that election, and now let's move on. I think the best thing for America is to achieve the solutions that we said we would do. If you look at what this Congress has achieved so far, from sustainable growth rate, SGR, that for 14 years no Congress was able to solve. We solved it, but you know what else we did? We were able to make a dent in cutting back entitlements, $2.9 trillion in savings. No Congress has done that in 25 years. We have gone without trade promotion. And at time that we have not had it in Washington, there's been 100 agreements, and America's been a part of 0. But this Congress changed that. So if we deal in this type of debate, we only weaken ourselves from what we want to achieve. Yes, we are upset with who sits in that White House, but we have the power in the House, we have the power in the Senate. The Senate would simply change a rule. It's not in the Constitution, and you ought to let the people have the voice.
Yes.
We have passed more than 160 bills that sit over in the Senate. Let's have a voice, and let's get the job done.
Mr. Speaker, how confident are you that you would have the votes to defeat a resolution on the floor to vacate the chair?
Very.
Last question.
When should we expect to see a CR? I mean, there's 6 legislative days left before the government shuts down. When should we expect to see?
We had a good conversation with our members yesterday about the CR, and we're going to continue those conversations, but we haven't made any decisions as yet.
When do we move from the conversation phase into the vote phase?
At some point.
Very quickly, can you just talk a little bit about the Pope's visit next week and what you...
About about entitlements. You have 2 of your presidential candidates, Huckabee and Trump more specifically, who said they don't really want to deal much with entitlements if they get into the White House. How does that conflict with what you guys have been trying to do here in your budget resolution?
All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and interrupt this event because it looks like we have gotten the live feedback from that Heritage Action event that was going on in South Carolina. So we're going to go live there. It looks like Rick Santorum is currently speaking.
As I mentioned the other day about both minimum wage, look at the XM Bank. I know that's a very popular issue with the Heritage Foundation, and I'm on the other side. I'm on the other side because I believe we want to make America the #1 manufacturing country in the world. We just saw, anybody for that? Anybody for making America the #1 manufacturer? I know your governor is, because your governor has laser beam focus on creating manufacturing jobs in this state. And guess what? We just lost some here in South Carolina and in Texas because GE just moved 500 jobs because they didn't have XM financing for a project that was going to be partly sourced here in South Carolina. Now, I will tell you, GE isn't going to lose any money. You can say, well, it was corporate welfare, the XM Bank's corporate welfare. GE is not going to lose a penny. GE is going to make the same amount of money making their product in China, Hungary, and France. You know who's going to lose money? American workers. We're going to be the only country in the world that exports any amount of product that is not going to have an ability to help our manufacturers compete financially. Now, you can say it's big government, you can say whatever you want to say. I say it's tying American workers' hands behind their back. American workers can compete with anybody. It just needs government to either get out of the way or lend a helping hand, and that's what I'm for.
Senator Santorum, our next question comes from Twitter and has to do with the border and the threat of radical Islamic terrorism. The question is, what is your plan for protecting all U.S. borders from threats of radicals and terrorists such as ISIS? And maybe as part of this answer, can you talk about the humanitarian crisis that's currently going on in Europe?
The border in America is unsafe, not just because we're bringing people across this country that are, as I mentioned before, that are competing with American workers. You know, I think an immigration policy, how about this for an idea? I think an immigration policy should be focused on not what are we going to do with the illegal immigrants and how are we going to get rid of them and how are we going to deal with this problem. But the immigration solution and system should be focused on how do we help America and American workers. What do you think about that? Well, we start with the border, because not only do we have people coming across who are working, we also have people coming across who are committing crimes and are running drugs and human trafficking and a whole host of other things. I introduced a border security bill 10 years ago that said we needed to build fences, walls. Now, I can build good walls too, by the way. Just like the other guy said, I can build a good wall too. And we'll build good walls and good fences. We'll put border security in place. We'll put technology in place. We will secure the border. But ladies and gentlemen, half the people who are here illegally are here because they overstayed their visa. They came into this country legally, and they didn't go home like they promised. We know every one of those names. We just have a policy in this country. The policy is we aren't going to ask you to leave anymore. We're going to let you stay. Half the people, roughly. We can identify them and ask them to leave and, in fact, enforce the laws. This is simply a matter of having a president who's willing to enforce the law and not opening up our borders to people who could potentially be harmful. Do you know since 9/11, the number of people coming to this country legally from countries that have very bad records of terrorism, particularly Muslim terrorism, since 9/11, the rate of immigrants from those countries has doubled. You would think after 9/11, maybe we'd be a little circumspect about bringing people in from potentially terrorist countries. But no, it's doubled. Do you know what the Syrian refugee, which Mike just asked me about, do you realize that the Obama administration has brought Syrians over here in the past? In fact, do you know that 70% of all refugees that have been resettled by the United Nations have been resettled where? The United States of America. And the president's out there trying to make us feel bad that we need to take more. Ladies and gentlemen, America is a great and generous country. But what this president has done with Syrian refugees, do you realize the last group, about 7,000? Do you realize all of them were Muslims? Every single one. Now, I have nothing against bringing Muslims into this country, but why from Syria did we bring in no Christians who are being persecuted more than Muslims are in Syria?
Senator, you've been a critic of...
And I would just say one other thing. If the president wants to bring 10,000 in, then I would just say to the president, you tell us who those 10,000 are. You tell us what the breakdown is of religions. There's a lot of religions that are being persecuted in Syria, and they should have a home here in the United States, just like everybody else that they want to bring over.
Senator, you've been a critic of President Obama's education policies, in particular dealing with college tuition. Do you have specific plans that would drive down the cost of college and technical training?
You know, this is this is personal. We have 7 kids. I have two of my kids. One who's not here. He had parade at the Citadel and couldn't quite make it in time for me to be here. But I have 2 boys at the Citadel who are very proud Citadel dad. But this is personal. I pay out-of-state tuition at the Citadel. Okay? That's a lot of money, just for your information. So I am subsidizing big time. And look, college education is, here's what I know. There are two areas of the economy that have grown faster than the rate of inflation over the last 30 or 40 years. Anybody know what they are? Education and higher education and healthcare. What do they have in common? The government. The government heavily subsidizes, so we have no incentive on the part of higher education or the medical community to save money. And so the answer is not pumping more money into the system. I have, like I said, 7 children. I'm encouraging them. Spend a couple years at community college, right? Help dad out a little bit here, right? Spend some time, maybe just working a little bit before you go to college and decide what you want to do. I think the only way that we're going to solve this problem, I mean, you can talk about, we can try to constrain the student loan program. I'll tell you one thing I would do. The student loan program under the Clinton administration was shifted over, and then eventually by Obama completely shifted over to a government-run program. I would put it back in the private sector, get the government out of this business, and have private sector oversight over these loans. And the second thing I would do, look, one of the most powerful tools a president has is the bully pulpit. And encouraging people to be as cautious in spending their money on education as they are on everything else. We have kids now today coming out with $50, $100, some cases $200,000 in loans with no ability to pay them back. They're talking about the next bubble being the student loan bubble. Part of that is because we have the bully pulpit, the president encourage everybody should go to college. And here we're going to make more money available. It's not the right thing for a lot of kids, and we need to give them some leadership and some guidance about, like I'm telling my kids, take some time off, go to community college. You can go to a 4-year school later. That's the kind of common sense leadership that this country needs.
Senator Santorum, you've been a vocal critic of the Federal Reserve's quantitative easing policies, which have the impact of reducing the impact of an American paycheck. Yet in recent years, one of the biggest burdens on the American family has been the cost of food. And policies that you've supported, like the renewable fuel standard, actually have the impact of increasing the price of food. How do you reconcile these two positions?
Yeah, I would say that I have been critical of the Fed, and I have been critical of quantitative easing, and because what quantitative easing does is basically give government a blank check to continue to spend, continue to borrow, because there's basically no cost associated with borrowing. If we were paying standard interest rates right now, we'd be bankrupt. I mean, we'd be even more bankrupt than we are today. We couldn't afford our interest payments. So yes, I've been very critical of the Fed because I think that's an irresponsible policy. I would argue with you that the RFS, which is the Renewable Fuel Standards, has done what you suggested. I mean, corn prices right now are about $3.70 a bushel. If you campaign in Iowa, you know what the price of corn is. And that's not driving food prices up. There was a period of time when there was a transition, but here's what I tell you what's done, is it's taken an agricultural economy that was heavily dependent on subsidies. Agriculture, whether it was corn or soybeans or cotton or wheat, a whole host of other crops, which were dependent upon government subsidies. Now those subsidies are gone. And by the way, I was on the Ag Committee, and I fought and personally eliminated a couple of them, like the peanut program, which I was out to abolish. Why? Because the government shouldn't be out there trying to push a cheap food policy and keeping farm prices low by subsidies. So we got rid of subsidies. We put in place a policy that allows market access for a fuel that the oil companies don't want to use. And what's happened? Agriculture has had the best years. We haven't spent a penny on federal subsidies, and the agricultural economy has grown. And now, once the farmers got things in sync, they're actually producing for the right amount for all the different needs of all the different products, and food prices at the farm level have actually settled down back to almost where they were before. So I think it's actually been a successful policy, and I think it will be a strong policy going forward.
Now pleased to welcome back to the stage Governor Nikki Haley.
Hello, Governor.
Welcome back to South Carolina. I keep telling
the #1 manufacturing governor in America right here. She's doing a great job. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. And I keep telling Senator Santorum if he's got 2 kids at the Citadel, he just needs to move here. So I'm still going to wait until you move to South Carolina.
I've got a brother who lives here.
Well, there you
I've
go.
got a niece at Carolina, so I'm pretty invested here in the state of South
We're
Carolina.
going to get him here yet.
And my son's girlfriend, who's actually here, went to Clemson. So there you
go Tigers!
How about that? I'm covered.
So I want to ask you this question because I think this has been this long-going conversation that we've had for a long time. You were actually a champion many years ago for Social Security reform for President Bush.
With Jim DeMint.
And the problem is, if you look back then, we had a Republican House and a Republican Senate. What happened, and what do we do to stop having these conversations when it's our own majorities that are not helping us get it through?
That's a great conversation, and I want to give a shout out. I want to give a shout out to Jim DeMint because Jim and I, we had actually the first time I recall, and I don't know if they had one since. We actually had structured formal debates on the floor of the United States Senate in 2005 once President Bush called for a reform of the Social Security system. Jim and I were the 2 Republicans. It was Dick Durbin and Ron Wyden were the 2 Democrats, and we went out and had a formal debates about how to reform the Social Security system. So you had a great leader, and he's still, obviously, if he's here, Jim's here, you still have a great leader in Washington with Jim DeMint. But you're right, Nikki, the president went out there and said we need to reform Social Security, but didn't really follow up with much of a plan. And Jim and I went out there and we put our ideas out on the table, and it didn't go very far. Here's the problem, Governor. The problem with Social Security is it's simple. It's a simple problem. We have revenues here and we have expenditures going here. And the revenues are all Social Security taxes, and the expenses are all benefits that go to seniors primarily, and some for people with disabilities. And if you have to bring these 2 lines together. If not, within about 10 years, we're only going to pay about 77 cents on the dollar. That's all the money that'll be coming in to pay. And so we've got to bring these 2 lines together. Let me ask, there's a good crowd here. It's a good cross-section of America. How many people are for raising Social Security taxes? Raise your hand. Right, okay. How many people are for cutting Social Security benefits? Raise your hand. Okay. Now, this is a pretty conservative crowd. I don't see a whole lot of hands. So here's the problem. Nobody wants to do either of these things to bring them together. That's the problem. And it's a simple problem because you got to do one or the other. And people are going to feel it one way or the other. That's why I always think, I give Jim a lot of credit, and frankly, for me to be able to step out there and put some solutions. Let me just real quickly give you one.
Got time, go ahead.
Okay, one solution. When Social Security was put in place in 1936, what was life expectancy? 61. And they set the eligibility age at 65. Today, life expectancy is 78, and I'm told the actuaries are actually changing the tables because they've done a recalibration. It's going to go up about 2 years, they're telling me. It's going to go up to about 80 life expectancy because they've actually recalculated how long people are living. So, and what's the eligibility age? 66. In fact, when you hit 66, life expectancy for any of you who just turned 66 is another 20 years. Social Security wasn't built for that. And so what do we do? Well, what I've suggested is that we adjust the eligibility age and have it track with life expectancy. So as life expectancy goes up, which normally is about 1 month every 2 years, then the eligibility age will go up. What does that do? That means that every generation of future seniors will have the same time on Social Security as the previous generation. That will solve, anybody ever, you like that idea? What do you think? I mean, that's one starter. And now the other second thing is, and others have talked about this, is we have a lot of wealthy seniors, and I'm talking about really wealthy seniors, who should not get a full Social Security benefit. That can take a little less in Social Security and help everybody else who's paying the taxes right now. Those would be the 2 things that I would talk about.
You know, a lot of, when you run for president, you have to deal with a lot of controversial issues. One thing, again, that you've been consistent on is you've fought against the Iranian regime for a very long time.
Yes, ma'am, I have.
Looking at where we are now, again, majority Republican House, Republican Senate, what do you think the first thing is that you do under President Santorum?
Governor Haley's right. Those sanctions that were put on Iran, I was the author of those sanctions back in 2004, 5, and 6, and we, thank you. We got a pretty good track record of doing bipartisan things that are conservative. My only failing was I wish we'd have gotten tougher sanctions, but I had to compromise. But it was a good compromise because we did put sanctions in. They weren't as tough as I wanted, but we did put sanctions in. See, that's the difference between a good compromise and a bad compromise. A good compromise is doing less of a good thing. A bad compromise is doing less of a bad thing. We only want to do less of good things, no more less of bad things in Washington, D.C. And so when it comes to Iran, we should not be compromising at all. This is a regime that practices a form of Islam that's called apocalyptic Islam. They are convinced and committed to the belief that the end of the world is coming soon, and they have a role to play in that. They believe that they can hasten the return of their Redeemer, their Savior, in radical Shia Islam. It's new, it's a new version of Islam, it's a twisted version that the Ayatollah Khomeini came up with. And they are committed to bringing about this return of the 12th Imam. Now, many of you have probably never heard this before. That's because your leaders aren't telling you the truth about the nature of the enemy we face. I've been studying and working on the issue of stopping Iran from getting a nuclear weapon for a dozen years. The Iranians know who I am, and I know who they are. In 1980, the Soviet Union, and Iran for that matter, knew there was a new sheriff in town, and immediately behavior started to change. Why? Because they knew who Ronald Reagan was, and Ronald Reagan knew who they were. You want to change things in the world community? You elect someone with experience, who has a track record, who has fought, who has, and will say on day one, Iran, you either open up all of these nuclear facilities for inspection by the United States of America and anyone else we choose to inspect, or else, and the else means not just a snapback of sanctions, but I have no doubt they will have violated this agreement. They will be in very close to a nuclear weapon. And so what I have said, and I will say it clearly to the Iranians, we will take out these facilities unless you allow us to inspect them and you begin the dismantling of those facilities.
Ladies and gentlemen, help me thank our honorary South Carolinian Senator Rick Santorum.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Our next video comes from a senator from Florida and answers the question how a Marco Rubio presidency would provide opportunity for all and favoritism to none.
You know, both of my parents were born into poor families on the island of Cuba. They came to America because it was the only place where people like them could have a chance. Here in this country, they never made it big, but the very purpose of their life was to give us the chance to do all the things they never could. My father was a bartender. And the journey from the back of that bar to this stage tonight, to me, that's the essence of the American dream. I run for president because I believe that we can't just save the American dream, we can expand it to reach more people and change more lives than ever before. My parents achieved what came to be known as the American dream. The problem is now too many Americans are starting to doubt whether achieving that dream is still possible. Hard-working families that are living paycheck to paycheck. Young Americans unable to start a career or a business or a family because they owe thousands of dollars in student loans for degrees that did not even lead to jobs. And small business owners who are left to struggle under the weight of more taxes, more regulation, and more government. Why is this happening? It's because while our people and our economy are pushing the boundaries of the 21st century, too many of our leaders and their ideas are stuck in the 20th century. If I'm our nominee, how is Hillary Clinton going to lecture me about living paycheck to paycheck? I was raised paycheck to paycheck. How is she going to lecture me about student loans? I owed over $100,000 just 4 years ago. If I'm our nominee, we will be the party of the future. We'll be the party of the 21st century, and they'll be the party of the 20th century. We will be the party of the bartenders and the maids, and they will be the party of the big companies that hire the lobbyists to influence government. That is the difference. That is our opportunity to speak to the hearts and minds and hopes and dreams of millions of Americans who want to believe and still believe that America can be greater. They just need leaders to show the way. That is our opportunity, and only our party can provide it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, Senator Marco Rubio.
Thanks for being here.
You guys have tough questions for me? All right, good. Thank you.
Senator Rubio, your first
There's
question.
a lot of people here. Wow.
Your first question will come from Debbie.
All right. Hi, Debbie.
Hi, Senator Rubio. Hillary Clinton says we need more government subsidies and control to address the growing cost of higher education. And often it seems like the right is afraid to challenge that approach. How do you propose to address this issue?
Well, let's challenge it tonight, right here with you. And I'll tell you, first of all, our higher education system is completely outdated. Completely outdated. It's basically a monopoly. If you want to get a degree, you can only get a degree from a school that's traditionally accredited. What that means is these traditional colleges, and by the way, I have nothing against traditional college, otherwise, how would we have college football? So, but, go Gators, that's right. I got in trouble this week over that. I know. Hey, Spurrier's a Gator, if you're from South Carolina. Anyway, but here's the problem. The problem is that who accredits these colleges? Themselves. And they use the power of accreditation to keep out any competitive innovators that may come into the space. So here's what we need to do. Number one, some of the best paying jobs of the 21st century require more than high school, but less than 4 years of college. And we stopped teaching people to do this work. At some point in our country's history, we started telling our kids that being a welder or an airplane mechanic, that was for the kids who weren't smart enough to go to college. That is a lie. I'll tell you this right now because it's a fact. Here's the facts. A welder makes a lot more money than a Greek philosopher. And so the first thing we need to do is open up higher education to more vocational training. And that means people as young as 15, 16 years of age. They've decided they want to work with their hands for a living so they can actually have a job when they graduate. We should allow them to begin to receive that training so that when they graduate, they have a high school diploma and they're industry certified and ready to work. The second thing we need to do is we need to provide competition to traditional higher education. So imagine for a moment a single mother. Maybe you know her, maybe it's you, so you don't even have to imagine. And you make $13 an hour as a receptionist at a law office. The only way you are ever going to get a raise is if you can go back to school to become a paralegal or a dental hygienist. But you can't go back to school because the traditional schools require you to quit your work and sit in a classroom for 2 to 4 years. But imagine if there was an alternative to that gave you credit for what you've already learned in life, in work experience, in military experience, and then allowed you to learn the rest, whatever you're missing, from a combination of different sources, including free online coursework. That's what Mike Lee and I and others are working on, is providing an alternative accrediting model that will open up competition so people facing those circumstances can become a paralegal, and instead of making $14 an hour, they're making $60,000 a year. Here's the third thing. As I said, we're still going to have traditional four-year colleges, but we cannot continue to graduate people in this country with degrees that do not lead to jobs. I feel very passionate about that. I myself owed over $100,000 in student loans when I became a senator. I still owed it. I was able to pay it off with the proceeds of my book, An American Son, now available on paperback. And, no, it really is. I'm not joking. It's available on paperback. But here's what I believe. Before you take out a student loan, schools should have to tell you, this is how much people make when they graduate from our school with that degree. So you can decide if it's worth borrowing $50,000 to major in Roman philosophy, because the market for Roman philosophers has dramatically tightened over the last 2,000 years. And so, in closing, what do the Democrats propose? Pouring more money into the same system. Pouring more of your money into the same system, as if somehow if we poured more money into it, it would work better. What I propose, what Heritage has proposed, is a new system. Revolutionize the system, modernize the system, and allow it to be about the people, not about the schools. Allow it to be about the students, not about the institutions, so that people have the skills they need to compete and succeed in the 21st century.
Senator Rubio, let's stay on the theme of pouring money into a failing system. You said last month that the time for personal accounts and Social Security, quote, has passed. A recent study by the Heritage Foundation finds that an average wage-earning male who reaches age 65 this year will receive fewer than 92 cents for every dollar paid into that system. By 2030, it'll be down to 83 cents. Why should we be pouring more money into a failing Social Security system that gives a negative rate of return rather than truly empowering Americans with
I just think politically it's going to be very difficult to achieve that or to pass it. But I still feel we need to do something about it very strongly. Let me begin by saying this. I am from Florida. You may not know this, but there are a lot of people on Social Security and Medicare in Florida. One of them is my mother. I am against anything that's bad for my mother, okay? But here's the fact. The fact is Social Security and Medicare are going bankrupt. In fact, the Social Security Trust Fund on Disability goes bankrupt, I believe, in about a year and a half or sooner. And then from there it gets worse. So here's the bottom line. Anyone who tells you, I want to leave it exactly the way it is, they're in favor of bankrupting it. And anyone who tells you we don't have to make any changes is a liar. They're lying. We do. If we want to save these programs. Here's the great news. We can save Social Security and Medicare, in the process help balance our budget, and we don't have to change anything for the people like my mother that are retired now or are about to retire. But here's what it will mean. People like me, I'm 44, but after the debate on Wednesday, I feel 45. It went really long. People like me, my Social Security and Medicare is going to look different than my parents'. That is a fact. It either will not exist or it will look different. And what does that mean? I may have to retire a year later than my parents did. If I've been financially successful, my benefits may not grow as fast as their Social Security benefits grew. My Medicare could very well be the option of taking my Medicare money and using it to buy a private plan that I like better. These are not unreasonable changes, and if we make them, we can save these programs for future generations, help balance our budget, and not have to make any changes to the people that are on it now. If we don't, they go bankrupt, and so does our country.
Senator Rubio, 16 years after Hillary Care failed in 1994, Democrats went back and they passed Obamacare. President Bush knew that personal accounts and Social Security would be a tough fight. It was a fight that conservative lost. Why shouldn't we go in a Marco Rubio administration and fight for personal accounts and Social Security?
Well, again, I just think that I want to save these programs, and every year that goes by, it gets harder and harder to do it. And I believe, just reading the politics of the situation, including where many people are in our own party, we don't have time to argue this for the next 10 years. Maybe future leaders, or at some point in the next few years, people will be more open to it. I personally believe that we need to deal with this issue quickly. Look, when I was elected in 2010 to the U.S. Senate, I think the debt was about $14 or $15 trillion. If you had told me 5 years will pass and nothing will happen on the debt and nothing will happen on entitlement reform, I would have said that's impossible. At some point, someone will be reasonable about it. Well, nothing has happened. And in fact, we are weeks away from raising the debt limit once again. So there's a sense of urgency that I have about this issue. No one's talking about the debt anymore. It's like, oh, we only have a $400 billion deficit this year. It's still a deficit, and it spikes in the years to come. So I just have a sense of urgency about addressing this as quickly as possible, and I honestly believe that the way I've outlined has a bigger chance of success early on. I don't think we can afford to wait 8 to 10 more years to address it, or we're going to have a debt crisis. And if we have a debt crisis, you're not growing your economy, you won't even be able to provide for our national security. And it's not a question of when we will have a debt crisis, if we will have a debt crisis, it is a question of when. It is the most predictable crisis in American history. It is self-inflicted, and nothing is happening about an $18 trillion debt that will be $20 trillion by the time a new president swears in. So we've got to deal with this as soon as possible, and I just think the way I've outlined gives us a better chance to do it.
Senator, our next question comes from Twitter, and it's about America's position in the world. The Obama administration says it leads from behind. How do we restore American leadership in the world?
Well, first of all, you restore American leadership by having the most powerful military in the world. And Washington is destroying our military. And I wish I could say it was just Democrats, but it isn't. Republicans voted for that sequester deal. And here's what's sad about it. I didn't vote for it, but I'll tell you what's so sad about it. It does nothing to balance our budget. Nothing. The cause of our debt is not our military spending. And yet we are eviscerating it. We are on pace to have the smallest and the oldest Navy and Air Force in the world, the smallest in our history, the smallest Army in a long time. These are serious challenges at a time when the world has gone nuts. As I said the other night, there is a lunatic in North Korea with dozens of nuclear weapons. The Chinese are taking over the South China Sea. The Russians are trying to divide NATO. Radical jihadists are in dozens of countries across multiple continents. Iran is also going to acquire a nuclear weapon. And we're reducing our military? And quantity matters. We have great aircraft carriers, but we need more of them because they can't be in two places at once. And so we must restore military spending. Otherwise, we are going to fall behind and be unable to meet the threats of our time, and we won't be able to live up to our promise that we make our men and women in uniform. And that is, if we ever engage you in combat, you will be better trained and better equipped than any adversary you will ever face. We won't be able to meet that if we continue this. We also have to keep our promise to our veterans when they come back home. We need a VA that cares more about our veterans than about the bureaucrats that run it. And we need a foreign policy of moral clarity. What does moral clarity mean? Here's what it means. We are reliable to our allies, and our adversaries do not dare test us. I only bring that up because today we have the direct opposite. Is there a better example of it than the state of Israel? Israel is the only pro-American free enterprise democracy in the entire Middle East. There's only one. We treat the Prime Minister of Israel with less respect under this president than we do the radical Shia cleric, the Ayatollah of Iran. That's unacceptable.
Senator Rubio, you've called out, quote, big companies that have connections with Washington because they can affect policies to help themselves. Many would consider sugar subsidies, which you've supported, to be the type of favoritism that you generally reject. Can you explain your position on that?
I'm ready to get rid of them, as long as Brazil does as well, because they're trying to destroy our agricultural system. In essence, they are deliberately undercutting the price of their agriculture, not just sugar, citrus. Why? Because if they can wipe out American farmers, they know that land will be developed. Once they build condos on this land, you can never get it back into agriculture. Now they control the citrus market, now they control the sugar market, then they can charge us anything they want. It's kind of what's happening with oil now with Saudi Arabia. They are overproducing so they can cut the price of oil because they know we can't export oil, so all we can do is sell to ourselves, and because of our own laws, by the way, not because the world won't buy it. And once they can knock out all of these people that explore for oil and natural gas, especially oil, then they control the marketplace again. Agriculture is critically important. They don't just do this, but Brazil in particular does it to those two industries. I am prepared to get rid of that when it comes to trade with any country we have a free trade agreement with. And I'm prepared to pass a law right now that says when Brazil gets rid of its subsidies, we will immediately and automatically get rid of ours. But I'm not going to let Brazil destroy agriculture in America because we have to be able to feed ourselves.
Many supporters of the Export-Import Bank, which you oppose, many supporters of the Export-Import Bank, which you oppose, make the same argument. We'll get rid of our export subsidies when China and France and other countries do those. Why wouldn't that same argument that you just made on sugar subsidies apply on SM?
Yeah, because the difference is we actually have other banks that give loans. In essence, the Export-Import Bank is not the only thing out there that gives loans. 97% of U.S. exports do not rely on the Export-Import Bank. for starters. Number two, there are other vehicles by which you can finance these things. There are no other alternatives when it comes to agriculture. Once the land is gone, you're never getting it back. When it comes to private business like this, an exporter, we have a banking industry in this country. It's become too consolidated because of Dodd-Frank, and that's why Dodd-Frank needs to be repealed. But we have non-governmental avenues for financing exports. And you really want to help exports in America? Why don't you lower regulations, reform and lower the tax code, repeal Obamacare, which is discouraging them from hiring people, not to mention destroying our healthcare system, and allow us to fully utilize our energy resources. That will do a lot more for manufacturing and export than the Export-Import Bank ever did.
Senator Rubio, we're pleased to invite Governor Nikki Haley back to the stage.
Hi, Governor.
Welcome back to South Carolina, Senator Rubio. We're glad to have you. All right, Marco, so this is the question. You and I both cut our teeth at the State House.
Yes.
And sometimes you get a lot of bruises and you get really tough skin when you get elected to a State House. You actually were Speaker of the House, so you had quite a big leadership role and had to push things through and herd the cats to get that done. The biggest frustration that I have and that this audience has is we were told if you hire a Republican majority,
right,
everything will change. We hired a Republican majority in both the House and the Senate. And in D.C., nothing has changed.
That's
What
right.
is going wrong?
That's absolutely right. And that's exactly why I'm running for president, and I'll tell you why. It took me a very short amount of time to realize that our problem in Washington is that both political parties, quite frankly, are out of touch. The disconnect between Washington and the American people has never been bigger. Let me tell you the source of the disconnect. I'll tell you the source of the disconnect. It's not that it's evil people. Two things happen. Number one, after some time in politics, people become disconnected from the reality. They forget what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck. They forget what it's like to owe thousands of dollars in student loans they probably never did. They forget how difficult it is for someone who's trying to start a business. Do you realize that for the first time in 35 years, we have more businesses dying in America than starting? In America. And so that disconnect is real, and it exists in both parties. And here's the other thing they lose, the sense of urgency. The urgency to get things done. There is no sense of urgency. The notion is that our job is just to run the process and just make it work better. Some people have more loyalty to the institution they serve in than the country they're supposed to be serving. And so these are the problems that we face. And it's only gotten worse over the last few years, to be quite frank. And what I realized very quickly is you will not be able to change the direction of this country unless you have a president who is in touch, has a vision for the future, and has a sense of urgency about the challenges that we face. Because here's the truth. America remains a great country. There isn't a nation on earth I would trade places with. But thank you very much. I appreciate it. I've never been heckled by a dog, but
That's a new one for all of us.
Yeah. It's a great country. We'll never trade places, but we are on the road to decline. If we continue the road that we are on today, we are going to be the first Americans ever to leave our children worse off than ourselves. That is a completely unacceptable outcome. But that's where we're going to head if we keep electing the same people with the same ideas. We will get the same result. That's why the time has come to turn the page. That's why I support term limits. That's why
And that's what I was going to ask you was, do you support term limits in Washington, D.C.?
We have term limits in Florida, and the sky has not fallen, and no one has died yet. Term limits brings new people into the process, people that believe that things are possible instead of having given up already. That's why in 2009 I chose to run for the Senate, even though the entire Republican establishment in Washington lined up against me. Really, only one person in Washington gave me a chance, and his name was Jim DeMint, and I know he's here today, and I want to thank him. In Florida, only about 5 people gave me a chance, but they all lived in my home. And 4 of them were under the age of 10 at the time. And that's why I chose to run for president.
You know, and I'll tell you the funny thing is when Marco was running for Senate, I was running for governor, and so I was Nikki Who, but you were a little bit more known than I was.
Well, neither one of us was supposed to win, if you remember.
Neither one of us was, and that's the power of the people, which I always love. We share, absolutely, that is always the power of the people. So we share something else in common in that we are children of immigrants. How do we handle immigration reform?
Well, we don't.
How do we handle immigration reform without dividing our country, without forgetting the fact that the reason this country is so great is because the fabric of our country is from legal immigrants? How do we have that conversation and have reform?
Well, it begins by acknowledging we have 3 immigration problems. We don't just have one, we have 3. Number 1, we are the most generous country in the world when it comes to immigration. 1 million people a year legally immigrate to the United States. There isn't a single country in the world that comes close to that number. And yet, despite the fact that we are so generous, there are still people coming illegally. Number 2, we have a broken legal immigration system. Our legal immigration system today is built on whether or not you have a relative living here. Not whether you have a skill or a talent or you're going to open a business. It is primarily built on whether or not you have a relative living here. And number 3, you do have 11 or 12 million people in this country illegally. And almost half of them came here legally and overstayed a visa. And you have to deal with all 3 of them. Now, I can tell you from experience, we're not going to fix it all in one big piece of legislation. For 2 reasons. Number 1, the issue is too complex. And number 2, the American people have had some terrible experiences with massive pieces of legislation. The only way forward is a 3-step process. Step number 1, before you do anything else, you must prove, not just pass a law that says you're going to do it, you must prove to the American people that illegal immigration is truly under control. And we can do that. It begins by securing the southern border through a wall and through more personnel, but you can't stop there. It's not enough. That alone will not be enough. You also need a mandatory E-Verify system, and you need an entry-exit tracking system to prevent people from overstaying visas. After you've done that, the second step will be to modernize our legal immigration system, so that when we admit someone to this country permanently, it will be on the basis of what can they do, what can they contribute, not what relative do they have living here. And more importantly, on the basis of whether they're coming to live in America or coming to be an American. Because we want to bring people here to be an American. I just want to close with it. If we do those 2 things, after those 2 things are done, I believe the American people are going to be very reasonable about what do you do with someone who's been here for a long time and isn't a criminal. If you're a criminal, you have to leave. But I don't think we can get to that stage until we've done the other 2 things. In fact, not only do I not think we can get to that stage, trust me, we cannot get to that stage until we've done the other 2 things. And I think that's the only way forward. Anyone who says otherwise and tells you you can do it in one massive piece of legislation, they're lying. It isn't true.
Well, and I appreciate your detail on that, because a lot of people, like our parents, my parents, they're offended by those who don't come here legally, that don't pay the price and pay the time that they went through to get here.
Well, if I could add to that, the majority of the calls I get in my Senate offices on immigration are not about people that are here illegally. It's about people that are trying to come legally, and they are frustrated because they know someone who came illegally and is going to get to stay, and they're wondering, well, why did I hire all those lawyers and wait 9 years? And no one ever talks about that part of it either. So that's a real frustration. We hear it in our offices all the time.
When you hear everybody talk about securing the border, and I always say all the candidates are very quick to say secure the border, what does that look like? We need more than what a border security looks like. What does it look like in personnel? What should we expect in cost? What does it look like in equipment? No other candidate has been able to tell us exactly what securing the border looks like except building a wall, and we know it's more than that.
We have to define what the border. The border is not just the border with Mexico. The border is also our airports and, to some extent, our seaports. And that's why an entry-exit tracking system is so critical. America has become a hotel that checks you in but never checks you out. So in essence, when you come on a visa, I know it happens all the time. People come on a visa, and it's a 90-day visa, and they check in, and we know you arrived. But in many places, they never log you out. So we have no idea if you're still here or not. And that's almost over 40% of the problem. In Florida, it's up in the 80% of the problem. So we have to change that. You need a mandatory E-Verify system, because that job magnet has to be shut off. That's what allows people to come here, and quite frankly, that's what allows industries to take advantage of this situation. And then there are corridors on the border. When you cross the southern border, first of all, the majority of them are now coming from all over the world, primarily in the Americas, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, because those countries have become very dangerous and they're a mess. They're coming through Mexico and into the United States. That border has corridors that people come across. And the reason why they cross in those specific places is because it's near an interstate highway that takes them into a major city, Phoenix, Tucson, El Paso, you name it. Those are the areas that we need the walls, combined with personnel in the thousands of additional border agents, along with cameras and sensors. We have secured borders all over the world. Israel secured borders. Other countries have done it. We know how to do it. It takes the money and the willingness to do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, a man with the details. Help me thank Senator Marco Rubio.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, our next video comes from a doctor and senator from Kentucky and answers the question, how would Rand Paul provide opportunity for all and favoritism to none?
There's probably few candidates for 2016 that are more interesting than Rand Paul.
To fix Washington, we can't have business as usual. Congress should read every bill.
Rand Paul has been the most consistently principled person talking about issues.
Congress has an abysmal record at balancing anything. Our only recourse is to force them to balance the budget with a constitutional amendment.
The senator from Kentucky might just be the candidate who ends up winning this thing.
I see our big cities once again shining and beckoning with creativity and ingenuity, with American companies offering American jobs.
He's got the organization on the ground right now. He's in all 50 states. He's got young folks gravitating towards him. He's got African Americans taking a pause and looking at him.
Congress should also live under the laws they pass. If they won't listen, we should limit all their terms and send the career politicians packing.
Let me ask you also about the Planned Parenthood videos. After they were released, you offered an amendment to the highway funding bill to defund Planned Parenthood.
I think the time is now to discuss whether taxpayer dollars should be going to such a gruesome procedure. It's time for a new way, a new set of ideas, a new leader, one you can trust, one who works for you, and above all, it's time for a new president.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, Senator Rand Paul.
Senator Paul, your first question tonight comes from Heather.
Senator Paul, many feel that to broaden the appeal of its message, the Republican Party needs to take on a more populist message and reject the influence of special interests. What can the Republican Party do to reject its purported image as the party of big business bailouts?
Well, I think we do need to be a bigger party, and I've been saying we need to be bigger, better, bolder. But there is a debate in our party. Some say, well, we should dilute what we stand for. We should be Democrat light, and then we'll win elections. I think nothing could be farther from the truth. I think we need to be more boldly for what we are for. Included in that would be the things I learned as a kid. I met Ronald Reagan when I was a teenager. We traveled to the convention in Kansas City in 1976 because we were part of the grassroots against the establishment. But Reagan ran on making government smaller. Reagan ran on lower taxes. But I'll tell you, in Washington, most of the Republicans do not believe in lowering your taxes. Most of the Washington Republicans say, oh, we want revenue-neutral tax reform. And I say, if that's what we're for, I'm going home. That means half of your taxes would go up and half of your taxes would go down, but the net effect would be zero. So to make our party bigger, we ought to be bigger, better, bolder, for lower taxes, less regulation. Every Republican in Washington votes for the balanced budget amendment, but I actually put forward a budget that balances. And only about a third of the Republicans in the Senate had the guts to vote for a budget that balances, because guess what?
It cut spending. We actually did what Ronald Reagan said he would do. We eliminated the Department of Education completely, the whole thing. But I have tried to take our principles to places Republicans haven't been going. I've been to Detroit. A month ago, I was in the south side of Chicago. I've been to Ferguson, I've been to Baltimore. I've been throughout the United States to our big cities saying, small government will help poverty. Small government, lower taxes will help you get jobs and create opportunities. School choice will help you to escape a bad school. I've been going to the cities with our message, not with a watered down message, but with our message. But I've also gone to the youth and I've said, you know what? We're a great party. We defend the Second Amendment, but we got to defend the Fourth Amendment, the right to privacy if you want to defend the Second Amendment. But I do think that we can take a bigger, better, bolder message to new audiences and bring them in. And for goodness sakes, we're going to have to. We think we can win with the people we have. In South Carolina, you're doing a great job. I commend you. However, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, there's 18 states we haven't won in 30 years. We're going to have to figure out how to take our message, not dilute it, but take our message to new audiences. I think I am the one who can do it. I can do it without diluting our messages, and I will get it done.
Senator Paul, some supporters of same-sex marriage are moving beyond their victory at the Supreme Court and seeking to pass laws that would coerce people of faith into participating in same-sex weddings. How should our society balance the goals of promoting fairness and respecting freedom of conscience?
This is kind of going on right now in my home state. You've read about the county clerk who she says because of her religious principles, she's not going to sign the documents. And there have been many people, in fact, most of the Republican candidates have said she should be punished. I've disagreed. I've said that it was a mistake to put her in jail because I think that they should accommodate, you should have the ability to opt out of laws that go against your religious beliefs. But I'm not talking about just defying the law. In Kentucky, we actually have a law called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. We passed it in 2013 precisely to give elected officials the ability not to participate in something they disagree with. I've always thought that marriage was a local issue. I don't want my guns or my marriage registered in Washington. The Hobby Lobby case was a victory for all of us. You have a Christian family who said that they did not feel that the government should compel them to provide money for something they objected to, abortion. And I love the way their attorney put it. Their attorney said that you shouldn't have to give up on your faith to remain in business, but nor should you have to give up on your business to remain true to your faith. What's happening is the government has grown too large in every level, not only in your business, not only in taxes, but in your personal life and in your religious affairs. And when the mayor of Houston sent a subpoena to ministers and said they wanted their sermons, you know what I say? That's when we should resist. I say defy them.
Senator Paul, our nation's murder rate is increasing in many of our major cities this year, and some blame what has been called the Ferguson effect, namely a less aggressive policing caused by a changing of the equilibrium between police and offenders. Last August, in the wake of the Ferguson shooting, you wrote, "When you couple this militarization of law enforcement with an erosion of civil liberties and due process that allows the police to become both judge and jury, we begin to have a very serious problem on our hand. Given these developments, it is almost impossible for many Americans not to feel like their government is targeting them," end quote. Senator, do you believe a Ferguson effect is responsible for any of the increase in murders?
We have a federal government that now has 48 federal agencies that have SWAT teams. The USDA has a SWAT team. They arrested an Amish farmer for the crime of selling milk from the cow. I told my father-in-law about this, and he grew up on a little farm in Kentucky, and he said, well, I drank milk from the cow since I was a baby till I was 20 years old. And he said, the only thing we disliked about it was when the cow got into the onions. But your government might be too large if we're arresting people for selling milk, for goodness sakes. Fish and Wildlife has a SWAT team. Now, I can understand being out in the woods, you might have some people needing a gun. But the thing is, when they went into Gibson Guitar, took all their computers and arrested them, that is a government that's out of control. John and Judy Dollarite live in a little town called Nixa, Missouri, and they wanted to teach their son about starting a business. So he started a business selling rabbits, and as rabbits do, they multiplied. He was very successful until one day the USDA showed up and they didn't have the right permit. They had one permit, but they didn't have the correct permit according to the USDA. They began fining them, and I think at the end of 30 days, it was $90,000. But this was a government, and they wanted to be nice to the people, so they said you could pay with cash or credit card. If you don't pay, though, the government said that your fines within 30 days will be $3.1 million. So when the question is asked, have we over-militarized our government, our domestic government? Absolutely. We've over-militarized things. The specific program I was referring to in Ferguson has nothing to do with the shooting and was not a comment and is not a comment on the appropriateness of the shooting. My point was that I don't think we need tanks in our cities. I don't think we need 20-ton mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles in our cities. The program does a couple of good things, and I'm all for this. They give excess and older bulletproof vests from the military to our police. I'm all for that. But there are certain things that we're doing. We gave out 12,000 bayonets. What would we do with bayonets in our city? I mean, that's crazy. So, yes, we do have to be careful about it, and there is a difference between the Army and the police. And one thing I will tell you to commend the police is, I think the police every day do obey the Constitution. Better than your federal government always.
Senator Paul, with regards to the increase in murders that we're seeing in many of our major cities right now, do you think that America is giving our police force the support it needs to keep us safe in our cities? Washington, D.C. has had more murders this year than it did last year.
I'm getting a lot of echo from you. Can you say it again? I'm getting a lot of echo.
Sure, no, I'm sorry. With regards specifically to the murder increase that we're seeing in so many of our cities, Washington, D.C. has had more murders this year than it did all of last year, Milwaukee and so on. Do you think that our nation's equilibrium has moved too far away from supporting the police towards a more kind of understanding equilibrium?
Yeah. The question is, have we tilted too much towards civil liberties and away from the restraints on government? When our founding fathers put the Constitution in place, they said one very important thing. They said the Constitution was to restrain the government, not the people. But as much as I'm a stickler for the Constitution, if you ask me, are the police generally doing a good job and do we need the police? Absolutely. But the police actually do use the Constitution every day. I'll give you an example. If in Greenville tonight there is thought to be a rapist in a house and the neighbors say, we saw him go in there 2 hours ago and we're pretty sure he's in there, the police don't just break the door down. The police stand on the front yard and they call a judge. It's the checks and balances, and they ask the judge for permission to go in. And you say, what, you don't trust the police? That's not it at all. I want the checks and balances so we don't have a bad person take over and abuse the law. Madison put it this way. Madison said that if government were comprised of angels, we wouldn't need any rules. But as you know, government's often not comprised of angels. The murder rate in our cities is complicated. We have a higher murder rate than other societies, much higher than in Japan or I think in China as well. It's complicated why we have a higher murder rate. It's societal, it's religious or lack of religious values, lack of family values, not all fixable, but we do have to have the police to protect us. And I'm all for that. And I think sometimes the stories where I would say the balance has gone too far in one direction is we hear all the bad stories and we're not hearing the good stories. In Tarrant, Alabama last year, there was a police officer who showed up and a woman had been caught shoplifting. She was 50 cents short on her eggs and her kids hadn't eaten in 2 days. And, you know, from all the stories you think, what's this mean old policeman gonna do? He bought the eggs for her. And then they went and they brought her food to her house. So the problem we have is the way the media reports it is all you hear about is something bad that happens. And I'm not excusing bad things, but I'm saying that's all we hear. And instead, every day a policeman is helping a little old lady whose heat is off or air conditioning's off, or a little old man. I don't want to be sexist. But they do. They're doing all kinds of good things in your communities, but we don't hear the good things. We only hear the bad things. So if there's a shift and a balance the wrong way, I think it's the way we report the news. But we do have to be vigilant, and there are bad people out there. And the same way we need a strong army, we also have to have a strong police force as well.
America's socialist senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, said earlier this year that we should be talking about expanding Social Security benefits to make sure that every American can retire with dignity. You've spoken of the need to reform Social Security. How is it that we get to reforming Social Security and other entitlement programs when even some in our own party don't want to do it?
I was just hoping I'd get a Bernie Sanders question. All right, Bernie Sanders is offering you free stuff. He wants to give you free health care. He'd give you a free car. He'd give you a free house. But guess what? There is no free lunch. That just means somebody else is paying for it, but they're not showing you who's paying for it. It is a disservice to the country for Bernie Sanders to say he's going to give you all more Social Security and, you know, money's going to grow on trees and everybody will be rich and there'll be a chicken in every pot. The problem is Social Security is already short of money. For the last 5 years, Social Security pays out more than what comes in. Why? It's a simple demographic fault. People ask me, whose fault is it? Is it Republicans' fault or Democrats' fault? I say, nope, it's your grandparents' fault for having too many damn kids. After World War II, there were these big families. The baby boom happened after World War II. But then the baby boom didn't do their job. You didn't have enough kids. And then your grandkids didn't have enough kids. So what happened is we used to have 16 workers for every retired person. Now it's 3 workers for every retired person. And we're living longer. Now, some of these are good things. Living longer, good thing. Less workers, smaller families, maybe a good thing, maybe not. But the thing is that Social Security is short of money. You can't promise people more money. You got to figure out how to make do with less money. But we can fix it. I have a bill that would actually fix Social Security. It's not fun, so I'll promise you, you're not going to love it. You have to gradually raise the age of the eligibility. For my age and younger, it just has to get a little older, a couple months every year, but it's got to go to 70 for Social Security and Medicare. And I know nobody wants to hear that, but the opposite is I come up and tell you, everything's okay. You can have whatever you want and it's free, but we're going to destroy the country if we do that.
I'd like to welcome back Governor Nikki Haley to the stage.
Thank you. Welcome back to South Carolina, Senator Paul. You know, I listen to you and I can hear your dad's voice a little bit when I hear you talk. So, and please give him our best while you're at it. What do you and your dad disagree on policy? What policies do y'all disagree on?
I think it's better to start out with what we do agree on.
And I know there's a lot that you agree on,
too.
right?
You know, my dad is a great man. I have a great deal of respect. I love my dad. There's probably, and you may not agree with everything he says or with I say or Nikki says either, but what I will tell you is he was honest. He was genuine, and he didn't tell you stuff just to tell you stuff. He told the truth. He believed that the Constitution restricted government, that government was restricted, and that Article 1, Section 8 gives about 17, 18 powers to government. They shouldn't be doing anything else. Now, we're not exactly the same. No son is exactly the same as their father, and we occasionally will have some disagreements. I hate to go through a list, though, because it makes Thanksgiving a little bit uncomfortable. I'll tell you one, though, where we have a disagreement right now, and we try not to let it get between us, but I thought the Iran agreement was a mistake, and I voted against the Iran agreement. But I will tell you, though, I'm different than the other Republicans, and you may have heard this on the stage the other night. Some want to rip it up and tear it up and put it in a shredder and then stomp on it. Right now, I'd vote no. I think it's a bad agreement. But if I'm president in 2 years, the first thing I'm going to do is not to rip it up. I'm going to see if the Iranians are adhering to it. I mean, for goodness sakes, we should want peace. Now, I don't believe they will, and I don't think there's enough leverage in the agreement to force them to comply. But if for some reason in 2 years they actually are complying, why would we want to go backwards? So I think that's theatrics for the people who want to tear it up, because I think there is a possibility for peace. But I don't trust them. They've historically been dishonest, and I think you need leverage. And what I would have done is I would have kept the sanctions in place and very gradually over a several-year period take them off if they're in compliance.
Well, and thank you for that. And I think we can all say we are defined by our parents and the way they raise us. So not only do you have his voice, but it's always interesting because we all veer off a little bit from our parents. So thank you for that. You know, one of the things that you have done that I've found interesting is we had a very tough summer, naturally, with the things that happened in Charleston. You have done things that I think are very important to do, which is Republicans need to get out of their comfort zone. I think that they need to go speak to other people that aren't just Republicans. You have gone and spoken at Howard University in D.C. You went to Ferguson after the riots. Why did you do that? And what was your goal in making both of those trips or speeches? Or
Twofold. I kind of want to learn why people are unhappy. It doesn't give you a right to loot or to violence or anything like that. But I think it's a mistake for us not to at least listen. And the people I was listening to weren't the looters. I was listening to the African-American leaders in Ferguson who weren't looting, who had their businesses looted to find out something. But I have learned something, and I think this is important for us. And I tell people over and over in my speeches that while we're great on the Second Amendment, we need to be good on the Sixth Amendment. It says you have a right to a trial and a right to a trial by jury. And you say, well, certainly we're all for that. Well, I've had some debates with your other senator about some of this. But the thing is that I'll tell you one quick story, and I want you to at least think about this and think whether it brings out any sympathy for why people might be unhappy. Khalif Browder was 16 years old. He's a black kid from the Bronx. He was accused of a crime. Actually accused by somebody who wasn't legally in the country, fled and never testified. He spent 3 years in Rikers Island. 3 years. Can you imagine your kid 3 years on Rikers Island accused of a crime that he says he never committed? He was never tried. He spent 2 years in solitary confinement. He was beaten by gangs, and who else knows what happened to him there? But I can't imagine that happening to my kid. So when we think, oh, why are people angry? They've got no right to be angry. Think if it were your son. He tried to commit suicide in prison 3 times. He got out, and a month ago he did. He committed suicide, and he's gone. And I think we don't know that experience. So many of us don't know. We don't know what it's like to really be poor. We don't know what it's like to be in prison. And it's like, yeah, there are bad people in prison, but I think he got a raw deal, and you can see how people in his high school, his parents, might be unhappy with some of us or with not feeling like they're being treated right. And I'm not saying change what we're for. I'm just saying show some compassion, and let's be the party that's also for the Sixth Amendment, a speedy trial. The same were for the Second Amendment.
Finally, I have a great respect for all of my governors, but some have made different decisions on Obamacare. Kentucky has not only expanded Medicaid, they've also done the state exchange. What results are they feeling from that, and what are you telling them to do as a state now that they've done that, which we have not done either one, by the way?
Well, congratulations on not
Oh, thank
doing it. You know, our governor is a Democrat, and he thinks a little bit differently. He's kind of from the Bernie Sanders school. He thinks it's wonderful. He says in public, he says, oh, Medicaid expansion, it's a $15 billion influx. It's a $15 billion giveaway to Kentucky. And it's like, well, that would only be true if you don't pay any federal taxes, or if you don't believe that the deficit we're running up to pay for all these things matters. So you can offer stuff for free. He did set up a website. The website sort of works, although I tried to sign my son up and they signed him up for Medicaid. So the system, you can get something for free, you can get a website to make it for free, but nothing's really for free. Right now, the federal government's saying they'll pay for 90% of the Medicaid, or actually they're paying for all of it, and then it goes to 90%, but the 10% is going to be enough to bust our budget. But really, we shouldn't worry just about the 10% for the state. We need to worry about the 90% that all of us are paying as federal taxpayers, and it's really debt. We're not even paying for it. It's debt, and it's making us weaker as a country.
Tell your dad we said hello. Everyone, please thank
Thank you.
Senator Rand Paul.
Our next video comes from a businesswoman from California and explains how a Carly Fiorina administration would bring opportunity to all and favoritism to none.
Hello, I'm Carly Fiorina. This nation was built on the promise of opportunity for all, favoritism for none. And yet we have come to a time, a pivotal time in our nation's history, where opportunity and potential is being crushed by a federal government that has become so large, so costly, so complicated, so inept, and so corrupt that literally only the big, the powerful, the wealthy, and the well-connected can deal with it. In order to restore opportunity for all, in order to level the playing field between the big, the powerful, the wealthy, and the small and the powerless, we need to simplify government, reduce its size, reduce its power, reduce its reach, hold it accountable for performance, hold it accountable to those who actually pay for it, the American taxpayer. And so we have to hack away at the regulatory thicket. We have to take a 73,000-page tax code down to about 3 pages, and we need to engage citizens actively in the process of their government. We need to make sure that we hold government accountable in real ways, so that, for example, when hundreds of thousands of veterans die before they receive care, there are consequences. Opportunity for all, favoritism for none, can only be achieved if we go back to the basic principles of a limited government that is accountable to the citizens who pay for it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, Ms. Carly Fiorina.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you. Thank you.
Ms. Fiorina, your first question will come from Bill.
Hi, Bill.
Hi, Mrs. Fiorina. You've said that big business and big government get together and say, let's make things really hard for the little guy. As president, how do you wrestle that power away from the established elites in Washington and make a level playing field?
Well, you know, it's called crony capitalism, ladies and gentlemen.
And I don't think that it starts out with people trying to do the wrong thing. But I think what has happened, is over the last 50 years, everything just gets more and more complicated. For the last 50 years, government has gotten bigger, more expensive, under both Republicans and Democrats alike. The truth is, Republicans have been talking about reducing debt and limiting the size of government and reducing its power and reach for 50 years. And it's never happened. Just like we keep talking about regulatory restraint, and yet we haven't succeeded in repealing very many regulations. I can't think of any except for maybe the 55-mile-per-hour speed limit that Reagan got rid of finally. And meanwhile, the tax code just gets more and more complicated so that it now is 73,000 pages, as I said in that video. This means we have to challenge the status quo. But when something is that complicated, a regulatory thicket that's literally impenetrable, a 73,000-page tax code, agencies that just keep growing and growing and doing things, then guess what? Only a big company with lots of resources, accountants, lawyers, lobbyists, only the wealthy, the powerful, the well-connected can deal with that. So, what is the answer? The answer is to simplify as well as to reduce power. You know why I say a 3-page tax code? Because if it's 3 pages, anybody can understand it. And anybody can fill it out. And you don't need an accountant to help you. And by the way, if we have a 3-page tax code, we need a whole lot fewer people at the IRS looking over the tax code. We need to go to zero-based budgeting. You know what zero-based budgeting is? A fancy word. Yeah, you know what it is. It's a fancy word for every single dollar has to be justified every single year. Because today, what do? We just talk about the rate of increase over last year. This is why, look, Heritage Action, why did Jim DeMint leave the Senate and come to run Heritage? Because he realized, as all of you do, that it's not just about replacing a D with an R in the White House. It's actually about changing the system and challenging the status quo, and that is why I'm running for President of the United States.
Ms. Fiorina, many have praised your strong response about Planned Parenthood at the debate on Wednesday night, where you called for Planned Parenthood to be defunded this year. You said in 2013 that Congress never had any chance of getting President Obama to sign a government funding bill that defunded Obamacare. What has changed? How do we get President Obama to sign a funding bill that funds the government but doesn't fund Planned Parenthood?
Well, you know, one of the things that's changed is we're in charge of the Senate. And we have record majorities in the House. That's a huge change from 2013. And by the way, I worked really hard for that change. And I know all of you worked really hard for that change too. And what's disappointing is we're having the same old conversation. Nothing's changed. If this videotape, which the mainstream media continues to say doesn't exist, I mean, honestly, I went on national television the morning after the debate, and George Stephanopoulos at ABC News told me that I was mistaken, that the tapes don't exist, that the images aren't real. Well, yes, ladies and gentlemen, they are real, and I will issue my charge again. Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, anyone who wants to defend Planned Parenthood, watch these tapes. So back to what's disappointing. If we will not fight for this, if we will not fight for this, faced with proof positive of the butchery that is going on at Planned Parenthood, faced with an assault on the character of our nation, and that is what I believe this is. It is not actually about whether you're pro-choice or pro-life. We cannot be a nation that funds this kind of barbarity, and that is what it is. And so, with record majorities in the House of Representatives and with a majority in the US Senate, if we do not have the courage to stand up and say, President Obama, if you're prepared to shut down the government to defend this kind of barbarity, have at it and explain it to the American people.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says that we have to wait until 2017 to defund Planned Parenthood, and says that an effort to defund it this year would end as the 2013 Obamacare effort ended. As president, you'll have to work with Mitch McConnell. How would you convince him to get in the fight and defund Planned Parenthood this year?
Well, I think leaders should produce results. And I think there are some very clear things that leadership in the House and the Senate ought to be doing right now. I think they ought to pass a border security bill. Be nice after 25 years. Let President Obama veto that too. They ought to pass what's called the REINS Act, which gives Congress the authority, imagine this, to actually look at regulations before they're passed. Wouldn't that be novel? And they ought to fight over the defunding of Planned Parenthood. Now, let us talk about January 2017. Let us talk about a President Fiorina in the White House. Because what it's going to take to actually challenge the status quo, to actually change the system, is not simply the president. It's citizens of this nation. Ours was intended to be a citizen government. And so you know what I'm going to do, ladies and gentlemen, and please remember this. I am going to use the power of technology to re-engage citizens in the process of their governments. Let me just give you fair warning. Let me give you fair warning. How many of you still own a flip phone? Okay, you need to upgrade. You have 18 months. You got to upgrade. I will ask you in a weekly address, let's say the weekly radio address, I will say to you, ladies and gentlemen, please take out your smartphones. I'd like to ask you a couple questions. Do you believe we ought to go to zero-based budgeting so we know where every dollar of your money is being spent? Press 1 for yes, 2 for no. Ladies and gentlemen, this technology exists. We use it for superficial and silly things. But now we need to use it to put the pressure of a citizenry that has grown angry and frustrated and tired of business as usual on Congress so they will act. And I will tell you a quick little story so you are confident, as I am, that when Congress feels the pressure, they will act. You remember the scandal in Arizona of wait times at the Veterans Administration. We realized that veterans were dying, waiting for care, and that bureaucrats were fudging the books so nobody found out. And the pressure for the American people was so intense that Congress passed, in 3 short weeks, a bipartisan bill that allowed the VA to fire the top 400 senior executives if they failed in their duties. The President of the United States signed it like that. Now, nothing has happened, sadly. And we ought to apply that rule all throughout government. When you do not do your job, there are consequences. But it proved this. Pressure applied by citizens on their representatives will move the system. So, ladies and gentlemen, President Fiorina will call on you as citizens of this great nation to take our government back.
When she was Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton said pressing China on human rights cannot interfere with the global economic crisis, the global climate change crisis, and the security crisis. How would you approach America's diplomatic relationships with China?
How hypocritical of Hillary Clinton to be running on her record of protecting women's rights when in her position as Secretary of State, she promptly took off the table women's rights, human rights, and any other topic of conversation that might be uncomfortable for the Chinese. Rest assured, ladies and gentlemen, I will bring that up on a general election debate stage. China is our rising adversary. China must be dealt with. China is now, as you know, becoming more and more adventurous in the South China Sea. They are building military bases on disputed islands. Perhaps you are not aware of the fact that Obama and Hillary Clinton made that situation much worse, because you see, this administration negotiated an agreement between China and the Philippines over those disputed islands, and when China immediately violated the agreement, what did this administration do? Nothing. And so China decided, okay, we're going to keep going. And through that South China Sea trade route flows $5 trillion worth of goods and services every single year. And so we must be assertive in the South China Sea. We must equip our allies, Japan, Australia, the Philippines, South Korea, Vietnam, all of whom are asking us for leadership and support so that they can stand with us and push back against a rising China. We must do that. I will. The Chinese cyber attack of the Office of Personnel Management is yet another example of the complete ineptitude of this federal government, grown so big and so bloated with so little consequences that people simply don't do what they know they ought to do. I served as the chairman of the advisory board of the Central Intelligence Agency for several years. We have known for a fact that China was trying to hack into our most vulnerable databases and systems, and yet the Office of Personnel Management did not plug the basic security leaks that they knew were there. But, ladies and gentlemen, we have real leverage. You know why? Because China's economy has to grow to lift people out of poverty and keep peace and this regime in power. Now is the time, when their economy is teetering just a little bit, for a president of the United States to stand up and say, we will use our economic leverage, because we have huge amounts of leverage. And one of the things we could do, and I will do, is say to the Chinese, we will retaliate for every cyber attack. We will hold you to every agreement you made in the World Trade Organization. They have stuck to none. And by the way, we're going to ask you to play by the same rules in our market that you force us to play by in their market. That is leverage, ladies and gentlemen. And it is important, as China is a rising adversary, it is important to have a president of the United States who has done business in China for decades and who understands these people, their leadership, and how they think. I do.
It's an honor for me to now welcome Governor Nikki Haley back to the stage.
Welcome to South Carolina. It's so good to see you. Good to see you. So I've got to tell you this great story about Carly. So someone came, I was speaking at the Republican National Convention. I was doing a lunch speech. And a group of women came up to me afterwards and they said, we have to do something. And I said, what? And they said, it is so wrong. This was before the first debate. This was in Cleveland. They said, we have to do something to get Carly on that main stage. It's so wrong that the only one woman candidate is not on that stage. And I said, but you don't understand. Carly doesn't want to be put on that stage. She wants to earn being put on that stage. You earned being put on that stage. So different aspects about you. Strong businesswoman. In your business, in all that you did in business, easy decisions, tough decisions, what was the toughest decision that you had to make as a businesswoman that will make you a great president?
You know, the hardest decision, I think, for any leader to make is about people, the people who work for them. It's very difficult, painful, to tell people that they don't have a job anymore. And yet sometimes that has to be done because, for heaven's sakes, sometimes a bureaucracy gets so bloated, we have one in Washington, D.C., that really and truly there are too many people working there and not adding enough value. And of course, that's why it's so vital that we have a vibrant economy so that people have other opportunities to move to. We do, however, in the federal government have 256,000 baby boomers that are going to retire in the next 4 or 5 years. I'm not going to replace a single one. It is a window of time. But what I really mean when I say the toughest decisions are about people, the hardest decision is when you have someone who is competent, who is producing results, but who does not have the core values that matter. Those are the hard decisions. You know, tone starts at the top. In a company, in a family, in a nation, there are things that we call core values. And in a company, frequently you'll go to your companies that you work in, maybe you'll see a plaque on the side of the wall, and it says some things. You know, we want to be known for high standards of excellence. We want to be known for integrity. We want to be known for a set of things, customer service. The thing is about people, no matter what you got on the wall, they don't listen to the talk, they watch the walk. And so if you have something on the wall, but people are acting differently, people say, what's going to happen to them? And if someone doesn't have the highest standards of integrity, even though it says so on the plaque, and they keep staying there and they keep getting rewarded and promoted, then people will conclude, we don't really believe in the highest standards of integrity. So the toughest decision I ever had to make was a young man who worked for me when I was a chief executive. He had great talent, great potential. I thought one day perhaps he could be my successor, but he lacked integrity. And so I had to let him go. Those are tough decisions. But if you do not stand for values, if you let those slide, then everyone's going to figure out those values don't really mean anything.
So now let's go mom to mom. You spoke very eloquently about the death of your daughter. We are seeing now in South Carolina and across this country heavy prescription drug abuse. We're continuing to see alcohol and drug abuse. You didn't have the opportunity to really get that out in the debate, and I wanted to just ask you some about that because I think so much of what we do is so that our kids have a better life. And so much of what we do is so that future generations don't have to go through the pains that we have. What can you tell us about that?
So our daughter struggled with all of those things, prescription drugs, alcohol. And one of the things that I have been so touched by on the campaign trail is on the occasions when this might come up, people will come up to me always and say, and it's so generous of them, and say, that's happened to me too, or my family is dealing with that too. I realized as we went through the long, painful journey with Lori, I met so many other families that were going through this, but I did not realize, honestly, what an epidemic this has become. When someone is addicted, you watch them disappear before your eyes. You watch the I call it the demons of addiction because that's what it feels like. They are overcome by the demons of addiction. And in our daughter's case, she simply did not have the physical strength to go on. We must invest more in the treatment of all mental illness, including addictions. We also have to realize that what we've been doing isn't working. You know, I very much agree with Senator Paul that we need criminal justice reform. If you look at our criminal justice system today, what you'll see is that we have the highest incarceration rates in the world. Think about that. We have the highest incarceration rates in the world, and yet 2/3 of the people in jail are there for nonviolent, mostly drug-related offenses. We are not helping people. Honestly, the reason I'm running for president is because I do not want to see hope fading from anyone's eyes. And while there is nothing as devastating as drug addiction, it is also true that I see too many people now in this nation that lack hope in their eyes. And I also know what people look like when they realize they have God-given gifts. I remember what Lori looked like. I know what people look like when they realize they can do more than they thought possible. I know what people look like when they say, gee, I didn't think I could achieve this goal, but I've achieved it. I know what people look like when they find and use a God-given gift. I know the look people get when they fulfill their potential. And for me, that look is fuel. And in this nation, every American, regardless of their circumstances, must have the opportunity to find and use their God-given gifts and fulfill their potential.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is what smart and intelligent face looks like. Thank you very much, Carly. We are very, very
Thank
proud.
you, ladies and gentlemen. God bless you. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen.
All right, we are going to be stepping away. Kinsey will be back at 6:30 for your Friday night edition of Fox News Now. We appreciate everybody watching this live stream today and commenting. Lots of opinions there. We love to see everybody chiming in and stating what they want to talk about. So we really appreciate it. And Kinsey will be back here at 6:30. So be on the lookout for that stream. She has a packed show full of lots of good stuff for your TGIF fun. We will see you all at 6:30. Have a good night, everybody.